Is the press ready? All set? Great. I'd like to welcome everybody to the Town of Fairfield's quarterly review meeting for February 2016. We have a lengthy agenda tonight. I'm going to ask Mr. Quinn, the chairperson of the Holland Hill Building Committee and distinguished veteran, to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance this evening. Please, Mr. Quinn.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Quinn. All right. Tonight, we've got the very gripping and exciting review of our comprehensive annual financial audit for the year ending June 30th, 2016. And our auditors are here. Thank you. We have an update on the Holland Hill Elementary School project. Now, you recall this came before us about a month ago or so, and the board had some concerns over making sure that the Building Committee and the Board of Education were on the same page as it relates to the ed specs and how they translated into the building project. We understand those have been largely resolved, and we look forward to that update tonight. We'll review the Board of Ed's financial position as we round the bend out of Q2 of this fiscal year. We'll review the current status of the town's pension and OPEB funds. Mr. Vahey will join us. And then we'll review the town's financial position at the end of Q2. Lastly, any other communications or conversations. This is our last meeting before we start the budget process. Hopefully it goes along smoothly, as we have many, many nights ahead of us that are going to be challenging and lengthy. Do I have any comments, questions, or concerns from any members of my board at this point? Seeing none, Mr. Senafani, please come on up to the front of the room. Mr. Senafani has been our lead auditor for a number of years now. I can't even recall how much. I should do a point of information. He's here representing Cohn Resnick and himself, who did the work. But Mr. Senafani, you've joined a new firm. Is that correct? Yeah. Can you just fill the members of the board in on your current situation so we know?
Sure. So about a week and a half ago, I had left Cohn Resnick and joined a new firm. The name of the firm is
Thanks.
Name of the firm is O'Connor Davies. It's a regional firm. They do quite a bit of municipal work in New York and New Jersey, some in Connecticut, and they kind of reached out to me to kind of grow the Connecticut practice. So it was an opportunity I took advantage of.
Great. So they specialize a lot in municipal financing and municipalities audits. Is that correct?
Yes, it's a big part of the practice. They probably do about 150 different municipal type, state, local, county audits.
Where is your new office going to be?
In Wethersfield.
Okay. Other question for you. You're here tonight. Your former firm knows you're here. This is kind of a bit of a sticky situation, I would imagine. Can you kind of walk us through that just so we know?
Yeah, conceptually, I'm not sure if they know specifically I'm here, but you requested I come and present the audit, and since I'm the only person in position to do that, I did that. So you'll notice the PowerPoint that's going around is generic. It's not either firm.
Okay.
But it's all the similar information, a couple new things that I added this year. But
Great. I understand through conversations, Cohn Resnick is getting out of doing municipal audits, correct?
The local municipal practice pretty much is moving with me to the new firm, so they will not really be in the local municipal practice any longer.
Okay, so we will have a decision to make as to going with your new firm, putting this out to bid and all that. So Mrs. LeClaire, as part of the function of the audit committee, we need to consider that, Mr. Mayor. We need to consider what we're going to do with the audits going forward. Probably a good time to just go out to bid and understand exactly what's going on, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, does anybody have any questions, problems with that at this point? Mr. Senafani, I want to, first of all, congratulate you. Wish you the best of luck on your new firm.
Thank you.
And thanks for coming out tonight. I know that's a situation for your firm, but we appreciate that. And we appreciate Cohn Resnick allowing that. Before I turn it over to you, Mrs. Leclerc, as chairperson of the audit committee, you have anything to add or say about this year's audit?
No, as far as I'm aware, it went smoothly. I don't have anything really to add.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, do you have anything you want to say regarding the audit? Thank you.
Mr. Centofanti will be missed,
Okay.
unless, of course, he bids on the job.
But all went well from your perspective and your staff's perspective? Mr. Becker, did you have something that you wanted to ask?
Just one question, because last year at the audit, it had come up that there was a fair amount of work within the finance department that Conan Resnick was doing. Are we in that situation this year where there's anything ongoing besides related to the audit, any special projects or anything like that? And the answer is no, then I stop there. But
I would say no.
okay,
No.
then that's no
We're,
question.
we seem to be having problems with the mics on the ends tonight.
Is it-
I didn't hear you at all, Mrs. Bossy.
She said no.
There was no special projects.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
You all set, Mr. Becker? Okay. Mr. Centofanti, we turn it over to you.
All right. So does everybody have the presentation?
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to just walk through the agenda. We're going to look at the various reports that were issued, some detailed financial analysis of selected areas, look at the recommendations, talk about the required communications, and then talk about some things that are coming next year and the year after. So we talk about these 4 documents: the CAFR, the audit report, the federal and state single audit, the small gray one, communication with those charged with governance. It's, one of the letters, 2-page letter, and the recommendations is the other letter. So some notable items from the 2016 report is that there's a new investment disclosure required by GASB 72, which was effective this year, and that's on pages 44 to 46. So basically, that disclosure is very similar to the private sector disclosure that requires you to disclose the level 1 through 3 with respect to fair value, and the levels 1 through 3 is as far as how much of an estimate the fair value is. So level 1 is types of investments that are on the stock exchange or readily available, and a level 3 would be something that's not actively traded type thing. So there's not a lot of inputs into that value. So we'll look at that footnote. Investments at net asset value, you have quite a few of those. So hedge funds are not necessarily category 3 if there's an NAV calculation. There's some disclosure on that, and we can take a look at that. And there's some new detailed descriptions of the investments that are at net asset value. So it kind of talks about the hedge funds or the private equity funds or the other funds that you're in and what kind of sector they're in and those type of things. So that's about 3 pages of new footnotes, new disclosures this year. And just kind of to close it off, the Madoff recoveries is complete. There was nothing new in this year, so the final results, which was the chart from last year, net recoveries were about 13.4 million, and the net loss basically was 26.7 million.
Do you remember, Mr. Centofanti, I don't remember off the top of my head how much real dollars we put into the Madoff investment?
I think it was, I don't remember exactly, I thought it was about 15 million,
Okay.
if I remember. So you almost recovered on a cash basis, almost all of it.
Okay.
So again, looking at the CAFR document on pages 8 to 10 is the opinion on the financials. And it's an unmodified opinion, which is that means there's no question cost, no issues, no scope limitations, those type of things.
Okay.
The type of opinion you're looking for on pages 11 through 18 is the MD&A, management discussion and analysis. And again, it's a good executive summary of what happened during the year, what changed from 2015 to 2016. And just look at bullets 4 and 5 on page 11. Again, we have some charts on this too. Your fund balance was unassigned fund balance was 27,435,000, about 9.43% of total expenditures. And that's up about up 0.9% from the prior year. And then bullet 5, just total debt increased by 2.5 million or 1.3%, just due to current year issues net of payments.
Mr. Sanafani, let me stop you there. Does anybody have any questions at this point? Okay. I have one. So we're looking at the unassigned fund balance on page 26, where we're going from 14.5 million in 2012. We raised it to 27.4 at the end of 2016. There was a concerted effort on our part to address this because we had been told that our fund balance was too low. Like we were at right around 5%, 4.75 to 5.25% of the overall budget. And we were told that was too low for a AAA-rated community. So now we've raised it to the 9%. What is the target level that you're hearing or that your other municipal clients that are similar to Fairfield and AAA credit for their fund balance? What's their percentage of operating budget?
The rating agencies look at it as a strong versus a good fund balance, probably more 12 to 15.
So the rating agencies are now, because a few years ago, they were saying go 8 to 12, right?
It was, many years ago, it was between 5 and 10, then it shifted to 8,
8 to 12?
12, I think, is a good number. 12 to 15 is strong, so I think, I think 12 is a good target. And again, they talk about variables of, type of community and types of things you're subject to. So being a community that's kind of near the water, they said, that maybe a higher fund balance is warranted because if something happens, again, the feds only cover 75% and that type of thing. So there are some other factors, due to location and the specifics of the community. But 12%, I think, is a good target as a minimum.
Okay. And Mr. Walsh, you head our fund balance committee. Are you hearing the same thing from Mr. Spurndell, who's our advisor?
He was going to check with the rating agencies, but he did advise me that in his ratings calls that he's been having, that like 80% of the call is on towns having to explain how they're going to make up for the governor's proposed budgetary cuts.
Okay.
And whether they're going to touch fund balance or not. And they're concerned that they might touch fund balance. Because there's no, to them, and I think there was a Standard & Poor's article recently where they were concerned and were criticizing the governor's budget.
Right.
This isn't a one-year hit. So, so there is some concern about that. Me and Mr. Senafani had a conversation. Obviously, we're in a different world now. And it would be another reason to maybe look at our fund balance policy and to maybe increase it. Mr. Senafani, even going back to 2013, has always been more of the national average is 12 to 15. You've always said that.
Right.
You represented to our committee the last time.
Right.
And you pointed out that in many articles, they talk about one of the things to consider is, are you along a coastline? Are you susceptible to hurricanes?
Right.
And we had Superstorm Sandy, and we all saw the results of that. And it's another reason to actually have a higher fund balance. So, I think we're going to bring Mr. Centofanti in before that committee to talk about it again. But these are some of the issues we're going to have to be grappling with. Is having 8 to 11 our buffer area, now that we're safely within it, sufficient?
Yep.
And now, just so no one's, there's a little different way, there's another way to calculate these numbers. The real number that the credit agencies look at, their calculation of this would make it about 8.9 and change. So, I don't want anybody to think that we're over 9 for the way the credit agencies look at the numbers in their calculation. There's some things they back off and things like that.
Right.
We'd really be about 8.9.
So,
there may be a recommendation to start increasing it. slightly. I mean, I will tell you that even where we are right now, even after all the great surpluses we had, whether we were, all the hard work that was put in by all the town bodies, all the, in some cases, luck in getting extra revenues and keeping expenses down in certain areas, we didn't really move the needle that much in regards to where we stand with the other AAAs. Mr. Spurndell has just supplied that to me, and I think we went up by, one town out of 18. We passed West Hartford. And probably the reason why we passed West Hartford is they had a major winter storm where they had a lot of wind damage and trees down, and they used surplus in that one storm. They had a tremendous amount of tree damage in their town. And they had to use their fund balance. But we have kind of, when you look at it, I was shocked. I thought, talking to Mr. Spurndell, when we first started talking about, I'll look at the numbers. He's like, you guys should probably move up to the middle of the pack. Well, we didn't move up to the middle of the pack. We basically floated with the market. We rose with the tide. Everybody else had those same, higher revenues than they expected or budgeted conservatively and had surpluses. So we are still near the bottom.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. One of the reasons I brought it up, well, number one, we always track this. Number two, between you and Mr. Spurndell, we get a lot of counsel. I did note there was a recent article where the state is indicating that towns should use their fund balance to help them fund some of the increases that are coming our way, or decreases in funding that are coming our way. And they indicated that, the credit rating agencies are looking for you to be at 5% of your budget. 5%. That was a quote from the governor's spokesperson, that towns should target being at 5% of their operating budget. So that is, number one, when we were at 5%, we were getting warnings from the credit rating agencies, right?
Correct.
Number two, it hasn't been at 5% for many years. Quite frankly, I think the person who said that was very ill-informed or very self-serving. But that sets up our budget process.
Right.
Yeah, Mr. Mottola?
So because I was thinking about this a few days ago too, obviously. So just so I understand what the process is, Mr. Walsh, your subcommittee is going to look into this during the budget session? Because
We're going to be looking into it. It's not going to take a lot of research, to be quite honest with you, because we've gotten the numbers, because we had to wait for all the CAFRs to come in, which came in on December 30th.
Let's, Mr. Mottola, to answer your question, let's go back a minute.
Right.
A couple of years, we've been operating under the fact, the board has known for quite some time that we needed to address the fund balance.
Yeah, I know all that.
Right.
Yep.
Then we turn around and we put together a subcommittee to look at the fund balance and say, what should we target, right? Mr. Centofanti, you actually provided counsel to the subcommittee, and so did Mr. Spurndell. And they came back, remember, and said we should target between, I believe it was 8 to 10%.
Right.
Right? And we put in place a policy that said we want to go no lower than 8%, or no lower than 7.5, and we want to go to 8. And through some good circumstance and some hard work by everybody, we got it up to 9, right? And now, as Mr. Walsh pointed out, the target's moved, right? So even though we felt we were doing better for ourselves, right, the target's moved to a higher number. So that.
Yeah, but isn't the question for our purposes for this coming budget season is, will the town's AAA credit rating be affected if we maintained it at this figure, or if we even used some of this fund balance? I don't know what the answer to that question is. I think we need to answer that question.
I agree.
So,
I agree, but the article that S&P was pointing out as well is that every municipality's credit rating is in jeopardy anyway
Sure.
because the parent's sick.
right, I understand that.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. But will the credit agencies take that into account when they're looking at a municipality? That's what we need to answer.
Right.
I will
Agreed.
tell you, I asked Mr. Spurndell how he thought the credit agencies would look at you trying to bridge the gap of the loss of state money with a one-off offset from our fund balance, reducing our fund balance. And he didn't think they'd look very favorably on
Okay.
that, because that's not going to go away. That same number's going to be there
Sure.
next year, and you're going to create yourself a cliff for next year,
And you're just going to weaken your balance sheet.
and you're going to weaken the balance sheet.
Okay. Thank you.
But it's the right question. And I'm sorry for waylaying that conversation, but I wanted that to happen because it's very relevant.
Right, I understand.
Thank you, Mr. Centofanti. Does anybody else have any other questions? Mr. Becker?
So just, because Mr. Walsh, I think alluded to this with the figure on the percentage now, I noticed in here, on page 11, you allude to the difference in the basis of accounting. So what are the ratings agencies? You have one number in here, but the ratings agencies are looking at a different basis for it then? So it's actually lower by their standard now? And then I guess the question is, what prompted the basis change in your calculations here? Referencing page 11.
Mr. Centofanti hasn't changed his way of doing that calculation. It's more of
I
a,
understand.
it's more of a way the credit agencies look at backing out a couple of things. If you look on page 11, under the second to last bullet point, and the second line down, it just says there's starting at the end of the first line, it says 9.43 of total general fund expenditures and other financing uses, parentheses, on a budgetary basis. They use slightly a different basis. So it
On
would
the
be about
credit side.
8.9 and change.
Yeah, just a quick comment. I mean, there's two ways to measure. There's a gap basis and there's a budgetary basis.
Yeah.
The conversation Mr. Walsh had with Mr. Sprendel, I have no idea, but whenever we've talked to rating agencies, we always talk budget basis, so I've never actually talked gap basis with them. But that doesn't mean that Sprendel didn't say what he said.
Well, my experience has been different, and when we've compared ourselves, even the last time we compared ourselves, it was on the gap
I'm
basis.
talking about my conversations, the town's conversations with the rating agencies.
All right, well, if we can get something in writing from somebody on that, on what the nation's using at the credit agencies when they look at it, that'd be great.
Cool.
I just want to know what the whole nation's using when the credit agencies are doing it, just so we're comparing apples to apples. Because, you go back in the CAFRs 4 or 5 years ago, we were using gap basis right in this report. And it changed, I think, in list year 2000, the fiscal year 2013, might have been 14, but I think it was 13. It's just a different way of looking at it.
And that brings up something that I think has come up before about these calls and then the information as it funnels back to us.
Tell you what, I don't disagree. We're getting waylaid off
Fine, we can
of.
come back to it, but I
Right.
do want to address it.
Yeah. Thank you, David. It's very pertinent. Go right ahead.
All right, so I think I was talking about starting on page 16, it's the financial analysis of the town's funds, talks about the major funds. So again, the governmental funds, the biggest one being the general fund. Again, that's the fourth paragraph in, and kind of has similar information as summarized up front, that you're at 9.43%. Talks about the cap project funds, what happened during the year. The revenues were 5.2 million, of which 4.4 were school construction grants. So the fund balance basically increased from a negative 13 million to 10 million, basically due to the issuance of bonds.
Who was that? He just did it.
Proprietary fund, which is the internal service fund. Basically, your fund deficit amounted to about $14,000, and we'll talk about that a little bit more of some changes in 17 that may affect that number. But basically, as of June 30, you're about break even on the internal service funds. So an increase of almost $2.3 million.
That's another fund we've worked hard on over the last several years. Okay.
So the next page of the handout, page 6, just again shows your trend and fund balance, that the unassigned fund balance in dollars. So 5 years ago, you're at 15 million, and now we're at 27.4 million.
Okay.
And the next chart just shows you the percentage going from the 5% in 2010 up to the 9.43% at June 30. So it's been a pretty steady increase over those few years.
Yep.
On page 8 of the presentation is a schedule of net taxpayer costs of services by function. I think I presented this last year for the first time. So this is similar to Exhibit B, which is on the accrual basis. This is on the budgetary basis. So it shows you basically for your budget what your expenses or expenditures were, what some of the revenues are, charges for services, for different fees and licenses and that type of thing, grants and contributions, interest and other income, and that shows the net cost of each function. Again, and the details of the departments in this function are in Schedule 2 and 3 in the audit, what the net cost for each was. And coming down to the bottom, net change in fund balance is the 3,175, which is the same amount that is shown on Exhibit F. So it just gives you a different perspective of how much, where the tax levy is actually what different functions it's supporting.
Yep. Questions on that? Okay. Seeing none, we'll go, Mr. Centofanti, we'll go to internal service funds, I guess.
So the financials are on page 28 through 30. 28 being the balance sheet, so on page 29, the operating income was the 2.2, almost 2.3 million. So basically, operating income was up as a result of increased contributions to the fund. Claims payable was basically flat, up 93,000 from the prior year. So net position, or the net deficit, is at 14,000, as I mentioned. So at June 30, basically, that's just about fully funded.
Now, how does this get impacted by the whole movement of the education healthcare costs out of this and into the state's program?
Right, so
That's a subsequent event, right?
Right, so that is going to have, and I don't know if Caitlin or Bob can help with the number, but I think it's over $1 million, but basically they're using the balance that they had in their fund to supplement the 17 budget. So, and I don't remember the exact number, but I think it's $1 million plus, so that may, depending on operations next year, set this fund back a little bit, or if you have the same kind of results as you did this year, you'll probably be okay in total, but.
So what I was going to ask was, and hear me out, and I might be wrong, that happens. They've got this 14 number, the net position you have now, right, includes that extra $1 million that's in there?
Correct.
So that extra $1 million is going to be utilized in 17, as it should be, because it's the leftover, right?
Right.
So really, our net position here isn't the 14, it's really negative $1 million.
Right.
Because this million is making it look as though it's fully funded,
Right.
as of that point in time.
Exactly, and that's committed without any additional funding, so we know that $1 million is going to drop to the bottom line as
Right.
a loss. Exactly.
Right, and I don't even think, I think the $1 million was the estimate at the time, but I think it's even, well, I think there was some runoff, right, that ate into that million, and that million's now closer to like $600,000 or $700,000, is that right?
Yeah, the initial estimate that was going to be left in the balance
Yeah,
was 670. I think now it's 740.
okay, so it's right around that 6 to
And
7.
that's, and then if you remember when we discussed this last year, that was folded over into, it's for this current fiscal year's, it's on that sheet.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
I just wanted to point out that we're showing a net position here that's really inflated.
As you kind of pointed out, it flips July 1.
Right, right, okay, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, how much of the percentage of runoff do you think's occurred already? And your experience in the insurance industry? Is it like 80% of it's done? 90% of
It's in the high 90s.
High 90s? Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions on the internal service fund? Mr. Mayor, Mr. Centofanti, please.
Or on page 10, I just kind of gave you it's a little bit of history on the fund as far as the current ratio. I'd always talked about as long as your current assets were available to pay your current liabilities, you were in good shape, even though you had a bigger deficit. And again, the rating agencies looked at that number and asked a lot of questions about it. But since part of what's in here is workers' comp, and that's more of a long-term liability, it could run anywhere from 5 to 20 years. So funding it currently wasn't necessarily a budgetary or a cash flow issue, but now that you're fully funded, that's again, subject to that million. But, so the current ratio is at 2.5 right now, but again, you've been 2 for the last 3 years. And you can see how the equity has 1.4 to 2.3 to the 14. So we'll see what happens in 17. But either way, you're still in good shape with that fund, again, because workers' comp being a long-term liability, not all of that comes due in 1 year.
Any other questions? Seeing none, go ahead, Mr. Sinifani. Thank you.
So next schedule is just again, a long-term, a 3-year look at the employee retirement plan, and then we'll look at the police plan, but just looking at what contributions have been, trending the net investment income, again, has been trending down, as we all know. Benefits are up quite a bit as compared to the 2 previous years. So the change in that position this year was a $4 million decrease. Investment rate of return, again, related to that net investment income, has been pretty flat. And then planned net position, again, has decreased by that $4 million this year.
Mr. Mayor, why are our contributions down so much year over year?
I'm sorry, what's the question?
Page 11, Employees Retirement Plan, 2016 as compared to 2015, 2014. Our contributions were very similar in 14 and 15 and dropped off by like $900,000 in 16. I'm sure there's an explanation, but I don't know what it is.
Well, we funded the ARC 100%. The contributions, the town retirement fund has been closed. So, we got the 401A now.
Right.
For all new employees. And they do the experience analysis, so it's in that actuarial magic somewhere.
Yeah, it just seems, I can't remember. Madoff?
Yeah, it was the 5 years.
Oh,
It was
so I
stated-
banged up?
it leveled off, I
Okay.
think, right?
Sorry.
I think it was because the Madoff loss had.
Oh, well, right, that's
worked
another
its
one,
way
the
through
the
the ARC.
amortization of the losses ran out. That's correct also, yes.
Right, but we don't get that same benefit this next coming year.
No, but hopefully the year after.
Okay.
We got, hopefully, if the market
Okay.
keeps going, we'll have some positive returns.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Sure. All right, and the next page is the same analysis for the police and fire. Again, the contributions are down. If you look at page 86 and 87, those show you the 10-year trends of where these are, but you are making the actuarial required contributions. And again, I'm showing you total contributions here, which does include employees, so that may be part of the variable. But again, the benefits are up a little, about 800,000 over last year, so change in that position, decrease of 4.7, same investment rate of return, and that position is down based upon that change in that position. So just as a different,
Yeah, Mr. Walsh, I think, has a question.
Do you know where our funded ratio is on the, just the employees' retirement plan? Because you don't seem to have that same number as you
Yeah.
have on the police and fire.
that's interesting that I didn't do that. Huh. So the fund,
Yeah, we don't have the ratio, we have the net plan position, but not the ratio. Not the funded ratio. Mr. Vahey was right behind you, I think he said, what, 94%?
It was until we changed the discount rate, so it'll drop. But yeah, it's low 90s for both.
Okay.
it-
Because this one's showing 87 for the police and fire, you think it's low 90s?
Yes, according to the actuarial. That's
right, just-
My recollection is after we do the discount rate, it drops down to 87 in total.
correct, but we just
Yeah.
did that last night.
Right.
Okay.
yeah, if we look at page 84, it's about 76% at June 30. So RSI 2A on page 84 is the 75.8. Again, this is just measuring fair value of assets against the liability. It's not the actuarial value, it's the actual fair value. You're at 76%.
Thank you. Any other questions on police and fire?
Just a pretty precipitous drop over 3 years. 2
Yeah. We'll have to look at the new study that comes out, that supports the budgeted numbers
Next week,
next week, right?
Tuesday.
Yep. Great. I guess we can go on to OPEB.
Okay, so OPEB, actuarial accrued liability, again, this is right now under old rules, as we'll talk about a little bit later. Next year, this is going to look just like the pension information, but for this year, it's so that the number for 15 and 16 are the same number because you don't have a full valuation done every year. So you're making more than 100% of your contribution, and your plan net position, the funded ratio is on its way up. So 25.8 for the employee plan and 20%, 20.3 for the police and fire. But again, you are funding it as above actually what's recommended.
So, Mr. Sanafani, I asked the question on our fund balance, so I want to ask the same question here, or a similar question. How do we compare to your other clients in terms of our funding of OPEB?
I think you're definitely ahead of the majority of clients as far as being 20 or 30%. Because again, we're looking at a long-term funding plan of 30 years, and you're into it about 5 years. So to be at 30% is a pretty good number.
Okay. Questions from board members? Seeing none, thank you.
And the last page is the Board of Ed plan, which is really not a funded plan, and a majority of this is that implicit rate subsidy, due to teachers that can come back into your plan. So the contribution made is more as a pay-as-you-go amount, and,
Right.
and that's increased every year.
Okay.
All right, so I talked about the footnotes. I just want to flip to that footnote on page 44. So I think I might start, the very beginning of it starts at the bottom of page 43, which just defines what the levels were. I talked about levels 1, 2, and 3. Level 1, quoted prices for identical active markets. Level 2, observable inputs other than quoted market prices. And level 3, unobservable. So what this is trying to tell the reader is how much of an estimate that the fair value is that's presented in the financials. So on page 44, kind of breaks out your investments into those categories. So out of your $455 million, what falls into the categories of being level 1, level 2 is the 106 and the 73. So some of the mutual funds and the level 2 stuff, bonds, because they're not necessarily active markets unless they're short-term, tend to get put into level 2. Then investments measured at net asset value, 233 million. These are your different types of either private equity or hedge fund type investments. And then you have some that are classified. But in looking at page 45, the top shows what the fair value, again, the same 233 million, and then any unfunded commitments, and then when you can redeem, and how much notice that you need to get out of those investments. And then continue on, there's 6 type of investments. It's a general description of the number of different types of funds that you have in these groups as disclosed on these different types: equity, long, short, common stock, fixed income, that type of thing. So it gives the reader a little bit more detail on the types of things you're in, if you have the commitments, when you can get in and out of these type of investments.
Finance nerds like this stuff. All right. Thank you for walking us through that. Any questions? Keep going.
All right. So that's all I have on the financials, the actual audit report. So looking at the federal and state report, again, on page 1 and 2 is a list of all the federal monies that was spent by the town. It's total about $6.9 million. We had unmodified opinion on compliance. There was no findings or question costs. We tested 2 programs, which are on page 4. Highway planning and construction, which is a lot of the either road construction or bridge projects. And then the hazard mitigation grant, which is a FEMA grant, which again, I think we tested that last year also. And then state mirrors federal, so on page 10 and 11 is all the state money expended by the town, which totaled about $17.1 million. Again, same unmodified opinion on compliance, no
I have a
findings.
feeling this is going to be a short report next year, huh?
Yes, it'll all be on one page.
Yes. All right.
So no findings or question costs really regarding the state programs that we tested, which are on page 13. And we did test 3 programs, and High Quality Schools was one of the programs. And the STEEP grant, Small Town Economic Assistance Grant, in addition to the pilot. So again, the SAS 114 letter, we do look at estimates and the significant estimates, such as the net pension liability, the OPEB liability, the IBNR related to workers' comp, and we do evaluate the assumptions around those. Disclosure, there was no changes in accounting policies. The GASB 72 was a new disclosure, but it technically wasn't a change in policy, it was just additional information. And we do, again, get the rep letter from management, and I think corrected, uncorrected misstatements. There was some, same as last year, related to the payroll accrual.
Okay.
So 2015 recommendations, grants management was repeated. The cash management was kind of repeated in a combined way with the grants management, and the public works record keeping was resolved. So again, the policy was developed for grants management, which hopefully will be implemented during this fiscal year to resolve this comment. And then tied into that, the drawdown requests was a little bit decentralized, so hopefully that will, if those are done, they should be provided to finance so that finance can record the receivable and monitor and make sure the money is coming in on a timely basis.
What does it mean? Yeah, tell us about the, well, first of all, the grants management. We'd actually, I believe, put a position in the budget to help solve this issue, right? But that position has not been filled as of this date, is that right? Or
There's money from the budget to hire potentially a part-time person to
Right.
help with that area. As Mr. Sanfani indicated, we've drafted a policy. I'm a little hesitant to hire anybody, given the budget for the coming year.
Right, so this will be a repeated
Well,
recommendation next year, for the most part.
We will not, well, we're trying to manage it with what we have. I'm not sure if it will or not be, but we're not managing it perfectly, but we're trying to make sure we have all the data.
Questions, anybody? Okay, can we talk about the cash management one? What is this, what did you find?
It's related to the timing of the requests for reimbursements, and some of it, maybe either the CDBG program or some of the construction programs, those requests are a little bit decentralized, so they may not be as timely. So if we look at, from an audit perspective, what your accounts receivable is for these type of things, that kind of gives us a feel as far as, are you requesting it as quickly as you could? Because as far as if you're spending the money, we will book a receivable for something that's a valid grant expenditure, that type of thing. So since the receivables are in some cases are large numbers, that's where the cash management is. Like in some cases, like a CDBG, the drawdowns could be done every 2 weeks if you really wanted to. So it's just, and the information sometimes is not coming, to finance, so a lot of the stuff gets trued up at June 30, and that's where you find out that you have a bigger receivable than maybe you would want if somebody was monitoring along the way, and it was provided to finance, you'd say, okay, well, if you spent $1 million, how come we're not requesting the money? So it ties into the grant management
Got it.
comment that if all the information's coming to finance, and they have the ability to be monitoring that and making sure that those requests get done timely.
Mr. Mayor, given the time, and I want to be cognizant, we got a lot of people, can we get a written answer as to how you're going to try to address this, or if you're going to try to address this specific issue in the next fiscal year? All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Centofanti. Any questions on that item from board members? Seeing none, go right ahead.
All right, so for next year, it's GASB 74 is effective, which is more the disclosure part of OPEB, so that will result in that calculation of the OPEB liability and disclosure in RSI, but not recording in the financial. That will happen under GASB 75 in 2018. So some of what you see for OPEB will then change to look like what we see for pension, and the recording of that OPEB liability will be on Exhibit A on those top statements as the pension is currently. So again, as far as rating agencies, based upon discussions with them, they already kind of factor that in, and they know
Right.
what that number is, so it's not going to impact you in that way. It's just going to make your equity on the top statements look, it's going to be
Worse.
a lot lower, right?
Yeah.
Tax abatement disclosures, I don't think you have any of those. That's just if you offered incentives for somebody to move into town and that type of thing, and offered them like a 10-year tax abatement or phase-in, you would just have to disclose that in your footnotes.
Okay.
78 doesn't apply directly. GASB 80 is updating GASB 14, which was updated by GASB 39, which is updated by GASB 61. So they really can't figure out what they want to do with a reporting entity. So they kind of modify it if you have a component unit of what should be blended, which means included in your financials as like a fund versus what should be presented discretely as a separate column. I don't think that's going to have any impact on the town. And
Okay.
that's,
Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Centofanti? Seeing none for now, I want to thank you for coming out tonight,
short.
representing your prior firm and your new firm.
Sure.
Hopefully, Mr. Mayor will be in touch over a process as we move forward.
All right, great.
Thanks for all your hard work on our behalf. And Mr. Mayor and Mrs. Bossi, thank you to you and your teams for all your hard work once again in getting us through a successful audit with minimal adjustments, and really, quite frankly, the fact that we don't have a lot of recommendations for improvement. Kudos to you guys and your team, so thank you. One question, before I let you go. We do have on staff an internal auditor, but you're not relying on her work product at all for your audits at this point, are you?
No, currently we haven't been.
And Mr. Mayor, can we get an update, maybe not tonight, but I'd like to know what internal audits that we are conducting, what areas we are looking at. We do have a lot of disparate operations, a lot of different departments with different policies, procedures, and I think we'd like to know that we're reviewing those processes and those controls systematically. Okay? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Centofanti, I appreciate it.
Yeah, I think.
All right. We're going to move on quickly to the update on the Holland Hill Elementary School project. I'd like to recognize members of both the Board of Education as well as the School Building Committee that can come on forward on this, and certainly Dr. Tracy's welcome to come up as well and speak to this item. I'm sure we'll want to hear from her as well on this. So, Dr. Jones. I always screwed up. I always do that, so my apologies. I'll get it. By your third year here, we'll have it all set. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming. I don't know how you guys want to organize it. As I mentioned in kind of the kickoff to this, we'd had the presentation. We had a bit of sticker shock. We had some consternation on our board over making sure that everybody was on the same page. We have a new superintendent, Dr. Jones, that we wanted to make sure was on board with what was going on. So we kind of asked you guys to come take another look at it. So thank you for coming back, and what do you have to share with us?
Okay, well, I can start off if you'd like. First of all, thank you for inviting us back. And most of all, thank you for coming in to reviewing both schools. It was very good to have your members all come through both Riverfield and Holland Hill. And I think you got a good taste of before and after.
Right.
Okay? So, yeah, the sticker shock, as I said, way up front. Okay, that was the initial broadside that we had sticker shock. Currently, we're looking at the same numbers I gave you a month ago until we finish up our DDs, where we'll have a very more stringent cost estimate. We're looking at 18.5 right now, okay? And that's not changed because there's no new information. When we get the DDs done, which will include our site work as well as, the changes in the volume in the school itself.
So that number, before you guys went and rejiggered some things, was closer to $21 million.
That was correct.
Right. And now you've got that number before you do some more detailed work down to about 18.5 from a
18 and a half, whatever.
Okay. Now, to be clear, though, that number does not represent if we have any PCB issues like we came up with at
Currently,
Riverfield or Osborne Hill, right?
Currently, the school is being audited by Woodard and Curran, same people that did Riverfield. And we obviously don't have a number, but
Okay.
they're in the process of doing that. The good news on that is that their estimate is, given the timing of this school and what there was done to it, there's a possibility PCBs might not be that intrusive, okay, because of the dates.
Okay.
PCBs was withdrawn from the market about a year before this was done.
Okay. Before the last addition to the school was done?
That's
The last
correct.
renovation? Got it.
Okay. However, we all know that what's in inventory is what gets used up. So there's still a risk there. And
Okay.
I don't mean to minimize it, but on the other hand, we have a more favorable win on that. In terms of the ed specs, I appeared before the Board of Ed and went through the ed specs with them that they have approved, and they all comply with what we have in our current.
Now, one of the things that members of our board did once we had sticker shock was we went back and reviewed the ed specs that were put together for Riverfield, and we looked at the ed specs that were put together originally for Holland Hill. And the ed specs that were done for Riverfield, and I think there were actually like 3 specific pages that were much more detailed
Yes.
than anything that were in the Holland Hill ed specs. And that was one of the things where we didn't know whether we were building similar schools. We didn't know whether we were hitting the objectives, right, the specific objectives of the programs. Can you walk us through what that process has been like over the last month to get to where you are now?
We have worked very closely together with Mr. Quinn and then also our staff to, first of all, look at what was in the Riverfield Ed spec and then look at Holland Hill, comparing those side by side to make sure, as much as anything, they looked more similar on those 3 pages. And I will say, to the staff's credit and Mr. Quinn's credit, I started on December 5th, which was before we were in front of the Board of Finance, and we had already started working working together on this issue very quickly. What we did is we took both of those and those 3 pages and tried to cross-reference so we could show exactly, if you go back and look on the board agenda, where there was a difference. There are a couple of areas where there's a slight difference because every building is different. We also, of course, held the tours so that members of the community as well as your board would be able to come and see inside the school. And then we really went back in and looked at the plans. And again, these are very conceptual. It's very early, making sure that what was on there matches what was in the ed spec and not going beyond. It's really easy sometimes when you're working on a school to want to do some things that are additional, but making sure what's in there is reflective of exactly what's in the ed spec. And so there's been a tremendous amount of work that has gone into this over the last month as a team.
And you're confident that the ed specs you have now are more detailed and support the program that you want to deliver at that school?
And I'm going to be honest, I think from the staff perspective, they felt like it was very clear, even from staff perspective, with the original ed spec. But I think we were responsive to this board, to any members of the community that might have said, why does it look different? And then the Board of Ed, I think, was also responsive to that and went back and looked at that again to make sure it was clear more than anything to the public and to the board as well.
And the Board of Education has actually voted on these on this revision or amendment to the ed
Yes, they have.
specifications? Okay, so this passed the Board of Education
Yes,
as amended.
yes.
Mr. Dwyer, do you have anything to say on this before I turn it over to board members for questions or anything?
I agree with Dr. Jones.
Okay, not Dr. Tracy, Dr. Jones. Okay. I agree too. And Mr. Morabito, you agree as well? Okay. Mr. Quinn, anything else? I kind of cut you off there, but I wanted to make sure we understood the process, so thank you. Do you have anything to add at this point, or can I turn it over for questions?
Please do.
Thank you. Board members, I turn it over to you for any questions on this at the present point. Mrs. Marmeen?
I think it would be useful, Mr. Quinn or whomever, to walk us through the differentials in terms of some of the reductions so people who don't have this document in front of them can just hear what the changes are in terms of the reduction, the reduced price.
Financial impacts?
Correct. The
Okay.
net difference, how you came up with that.
Okay, we have,
The items, I guess.
The
That's what
items,
you're talking about.
right.
Not so much the dollar amounts of the items, but the items themselves.
Right.
well, first of all, it was the reduced volume. We reduced the footprint of the school, new square feet, as well as renovated square feet. The new portion was a reduction of $1.5 million, $1,487.
And can I interrupt you? Can you provide the rationale to us for why you reduced the volume?
We were able to consolidate the addition size and reduce it by not creating renovated spaces. We were taking away classrooms of the existing building and cutting them up for different uses, which made our addition larger. So by preserving the existing classrooms as much as possible, and by taking out and getting duplicate use on the music room and our stage, we were able to reduce the overall square footage.
Might want to put your drawing up.
Well, I don't know if you want to go into that kind of.
The only reason I say that is because there's this, you can see on the drawing, there's a blue patch on there that is the reduction, which is substantial, if you ask me. It's not hard to see. That's almost $2 million difference right there, right?
The crosshatched areas are the areas that were reduced, primarily in the back and some off the kitchen addition. So by the crosshatched areas within the existing building are the areas of renovations that were eliminated. So we took out 6,900 square feet of new construction, and I think it was 6,300 square feet
Yes,
of renovated space.
62, yeah.
6,200 square feet, which is the primary savings areas.
Any additional questions?
Do you want to go through the rest of the items just quickly? Would that be useful?
Absolutely.
Or, I mean, we don't have to, I'm just thinking about the audience. For example, the reduced kitchen equipment, I'm not sure, it's 120,000. What is that coming from? What's that?
The original plan was to renovate the entire kitchen. Because of our understanding of what we thought the intent was. The board came back, the BOE staff came back, and made the point that all we really need are more cooler storage space and freezer storage space. So as opposed to doing an extensive renovation on the kitchen, we've still got a small amount of money left for replacing outdated equipment. But the savings is on the anticipated purchase of basically replacing all the kitchen equipment. Replacing millwork with shelving. We had items within the classrooms of millwork, so we were going to try to institute some savings by replacing it with FF&E. Adding back ADA bathrooms, that's a plus. We were asked to provide individual toilet rooms, accessible toilet rooms within all the kindergartens and first grade classrooms. So those were put back in, as well as painting all the existing spaces. Miscellaneous locker caps. Basically, we're replacing all the lockers. We're going to provide some fancy millwork on top of the lockers for shelving, which is really not necessary. So the net changes were $2,238,000 off of the original budget.
You good? Sure.
Can you give us, I know you're currently looking at the PCB, testing to see what's going on. Can you give us a sense of timing? I know this has to go through the boards for approval, but are you looking at construction this summer, ideally? And then would it go into the school year, or are you looking at the following summer? What's the
Following summer.
So not this summer, 2017, you would start in the summer of 2018? And do you expect that you would complete the renovation during the summer months, or would you have to go into the school year?
We will go into the school year,
You would go into the school year?
yes.
Okay.
As we did at Riverfield. And what? We're going to have a better mic system than you guys do.
It's not in your budget.
Yes, it is. But we're able to do that. We're able to do that and construct certain areas of the school, even when there are kids involved. Okay, we did it before, and we've spent a lot of time and effort on safety of both the kids and the staff, and we manage it very well between the fire department, building department. Okay, so we can do both.
Thank you. Questions? Mr. DeWitt?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just quickly remind me, there is some remediation in the budget, correct?
This is $200,000.
200,000, okay. And what, and I think we spent 1.3 million at Riverfield, I think.
Well,
that was-
that's including the whole gym, yes.
The whole thing, no, I'm with you.
Yes.
And what's your contingency?
Oh, God, we have about $1 million? Yeah.
$1 million contingency? Okay, thank you.
Other questions from board members on this item? Mr. Walsh?
Explain to me the add back of the 2 additional ADA,
Where-
why they
where-
were added from before to now.
Originally, we had put in one ADA bathroom for the kindergarten, one ADA bathroom for first grade, because that's the state regulations. And the other 3 classrooms didn't have to be ADA compliant, according to the state. The committee didn't feel good with that. It felt that we were going to load up one classroom with all the ADA folks, okay? And it felt to us to be discriminatory. So we added back, so each classroom, kindergarten, first grade, are ADA compliant.
Number one, I thought.
And I apologize, I hope you could hear me.
No, I have no problem hearing you. I I'd like to thank the Central Administration and the Board Board of Education for working through and expanding these ed specs. They are a lot better. And going through the special education and the number of rooms specifically, because you now identify exactly. Are there between those two any more rooms that are needed at this school than others because of certain circumstances, for whatever they might be? The programming at that specific school? Or are these, or would I expect at the next one, if we did another one, this exact same number of classrooms for special education and supportive services?
The ed spec does match 504 school. We would not want to base school construction based off, for instance, the exact children that are in the building, because 2 years from now or 4 years from now, we'll have different children.
That's what I wanted to hear.
That's
Okay,
great.
great. Thanks.
Anybody else have anything? I want to echo Mr. Walsh's comments and thank you for the work that went through this. It's tough when you're looking at a project this amount of money with such implications. You want to make sure that everybody's on the same page as you start out. So let's see where it goes from here when you come back before us for funding with more detailed information. But I want to extend my appreciation to you all for the hard work and effort that went back and re-looking at it.
And Mr. Flynn, if I could just make one comment, as I've done almost at every meeting, is one of the, 504 was a critical number for us, but the other critical fact is we want this project approved so that we meet the June 30 deadline for submission to the state. So I hope that the various boards will be able to look at this in May, or if we can't get all the details ready, then certainly by June.
I forgot to ask two questions. Have you analyzed the governor's new budget in regards to what he plans on or recommending in regards to reimbursement on school buildings, and how, at least as proposed, how that might change, and how Fairfield's percentage might change as proposed?
Yeah, I will. I personally received a kind of a section of the proposal just yesterday, which I then forwarded over to the central office staff. I don't know whether they've had a chance to read it in detail. As you know, anytime the government writes a specification, you have to read it 5 or 6 times before you truly understand it. So I know it's under review.
Have you had an opinion about it since you've read it, about what the change will be and how it will affect Fairfield?
It's very confusing in what was presented as of today. But again, we've only really looked at it for 24 hours. I do know they are lowering the reimbursement amount no more than 70%, but where you would fall between 0 and 70 is where probably the change will take place for different localities.
So those specifics have not been released yet?
Well, the percentage is actually in there in the document that has gone out, but where Fairfield would fall
Yes.
between 0 and 70, there's no clarity right now.
So that's to be supplied later?
Yes.
You mentioned June 30th, and so to jump in, Jim. Do you propose when you come before us in May, is it assumed that you would know what that percentage is for the town?
Because the legislation is fluid, the proposed date for its enactment would be July 1. So if we get in under the wire, we would be running under present codes.
Okay.
That's one item. It is confusing, as Dr. Jones said, that they're switching the upper and lower limit of the reimbursement range. So how the math formula works out and brings us to a 25% number now, I don't know that it's linear, because I don't know if the math formula changed. That's not clear.
Okay, so I guess what I'm trying to, you mentioned the June 30th date, the July 1st date. The proposed change under the governor's proposals won't take in place until that time, right?
Correct, but...
Okay, now
yeah.
here, I'm on
Finish.
a roll. Germans bombing Pearl Harbor. What's important, though, for that trigger date is when something gets approved versus when you get shovels in the ground and things like that. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay, so it's our approval, should it be approved, by June 30th, what you're saying is, hey, if we get it approved by that, we can submit it in the state before July 1st, and then we're subject to what we've always been subject to recent years related to reimbursement policy. If we slip that date, for whatever reason, we go into being subject to the Chinese math that you're trying to figure out, right?
Correct.
Definitely is in my budget.
It's terrible tonight. It's a cell phone that does it. Do you have their cell phone near a mic?
Thank God I don't have a big
We could watch it up on the screen.
for a while.
Go ahead, Mr. Walsh.
To Mr. Quinn and our architect, I know you both have experience with the Riverfield project, and how different in age was that gymnasium that we needed, additional, what do we need, additional $2 million worth of work because of the PCB issue?
Yeah.
Versus the age of the Holland Hill gym that's currently existing?
The Riverfield gym was built in 1971. The Holland Hill gym was built in 1978.
Okay, so this leads to, once again, what you were saying, how they stopped using PCBs about a year ago, and there might be things on the shelf that they were still using, so there might be a less likelihood of there being as large of a problem.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. DeWitt? I thought we were done.
Sorry, one more. This project is a little unique because this is the first time that we as a board funded, we gave you guys seed money, $1.24 million. New process, so I'm interested how that's working. So how much of the $1.24 million have you spent to date?
Jeff? Get the number.
And please come up to the microphone because we want to make sure we get this recorded.
There we go. Thank you. I'm glad I printed those out. Good evening. Chuck Warrington with Colliers International. We're the owner's project manager. We worked on Riverfield as well with Tom and Kenneth Borson. So as you mentioned, the total budget approved for this through the design documents is $1.2 million. To date, we've expended $373,000. Majority of that was portables that were installed at the school. That accounted for $188,000, and there's some lease payments and security and electricity for that. And about $100,000 in architectural fees, and about $45,000 for our owner's project management fees, and about $33,000 for the CM fees.
Mr. DeWitt?
Okay, yep, thank you.
Anybody else? Thank you, everybody. Have a good evening. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
All right. We're going to move on, and since the Board of Education is here, we're going to be cognizant, and we're going to ask Mrs. Manzel and Dr. Jones to stay up here to discuss the financial position at the end of Q2. And let me say, if there's any subsequent information beyond Q2 that changes the financial outlook, we'd like to hear about that as well. So don't just stop because we're in the midst of a new fiscal quarter. So go right ahead.
Well, I'm going to start with, there's a sheet that you probably haven't seen before, but it has the green on the top and the red on the bottom. And this is just a way for us, it's a new document that Ms. Mansell has put together. to help just show you the gap that we were dealing with this school year in a very simplistic way and where public can also understand it. So if you look at column number 1, what you're seeing there are what the projected balances are in some of our different accounts that we have, trying to really go in and examine where we could have some underspending, and of course, these can change between now and June. So this is where we feel as of today we are. When you get down to the bottom, what you're seeing are the deficits. Areas like our pension, you'll see a little bit in security. Probably the larger one that's there is that tuition, that $449,000, which is quite a large number above what was budgeted. Also looking at the professional consultation at $253,000. So the number that I had mentioned, I believe, to the Board of Finance earlier back in December, you're looking at that 1.3 million deficit, and that was based off where we are, as of this quarter. So what we did then is we sat down with staff to look at those underspending that you see on the top, and then also in column 2, while it says funds held in reserve, really what we've done is we've frozen certain projects. We've gone in and looked at our budget to see what flexibility we have for freezing anything that we can and being extremely conservative on our spending so that we can make sure that we're in the black and not the red. So you're looking at a projected balance on that far right-hand side right now of around $127,000. And again, this changes between now and June because we could have, one event like a snow day again that can, add costs that we didn't foresee. So we've tried to give you a simplistic look at what's actually happening this quarter within our budget.
So what you've done is essentially you've had savings that came up through the normal course of operations of $522,000. You've gotten hit with extraordinary expenses in certain areas that have totaled about 1.3 million.
That's correct.
And then you actively managed and made decisions
Yes.
on your expense base to hold back about $900,000
Right.
in order to offset your deficit position.
That's correct.
This is a great view.
Good.
Thank you. This is very easy to understand. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Can we walk, Mr. DeWitt, go right ahead.
Just, I see the savings or projected savings under teacher para sub-accounts. We talked, I think it was 2 months
It's not
ago.
savings, it's a hit.
Sorry, I apologize.
Yeah.
That's what I meant. Yeah, it's a negative number, but you're right. Is that the teachers that we had to hire based on the increased, why can't I think of the name of the
Yeah.
students
Kinda-
from outside of Fairfield, right? Not
Well-
special education, no.
Generally, what would happen is on that line number 1 where you see personnel and salaries, we would usually have a bigger number up there. This year, we had to hire some teachers that we didn't anticipate hiring, so that number has come down. It's not unusual for a para or sub-account number to run larger, just depending on how many people are out having, babies and
Short-term
that sort
number,
of
right?
thing. Yes, and usually that number on the top would have been larger, which kind of offsets that. We didn't have that this year. So we feel that $435,000 more than we normally would.
So where's the deficit from, and somebody help me out with the name of the program, but where we're bringing in children from outside of Fairfield, and you had budgeted for, I thought it was, I'm remembering a number of like 30, we ended up having 72 children? Open choice, thank you very much, thank you. Because that was driving manpower, I understood,
Yeah,
right?
so I'm not sure that where your numbers come from versus the question you're asking. We had.
Forget my numbers. There was an increased number of
Correct.
open choice students that I recollected drove a manpower issue.
If you had stopped halfway through that sentence, the answer is yes. Continuing that sentence, the answer is no.
Okay.
We budgeted for the last several years for 60 open choice students, which we earn $3,000 per student for every student we accept. We had more open spaces this year in elementary school than we had in the past, and so each spring we report to the CES, what open spaces do you have? and then they proceed to fill them based on applications they get primarily from the city of Bridgeport. When our staff send in a, quote, open seat to CES, they have a kind of a standard that says there have to be at least 4 vacant seats in that particular section, in that particular school, so that the advent of one student in that particular class will not result in having to add a teacher. And so there's no teachers added this year because we went from 60 to 72.
Right, but there are teachers added.
2.7 teachers, right?
Well, no, what, I think, Chris, what you might be referring to, and Mr. DeWitt, is, I mean, Mr. Dwyer, what you just said is accurate.
Yeah.
I know that. It's accurate for the first couple of years. The thing with open choice is those students who are taken in the primary grades, typically, right, stay in the school system for multiple years. And when Dr. Tracy was here, I got that right this time, when Dr. Tracy was here, he actually said to us that there was analysis done that said, hey, after those first couple of years, we've gone back and looked and said, due to there being more open choice kids in the school system, we've had to up the number of teachers. I want to say the number was like $300,000 in total teachers' salaries for kids that had been here for a certain period of time that had moved on from the other two, because obviously you can only do the section math for a couple of years, right? Now, that's what we were told back in the
No,
fall.
you're correct. You're
Right.
correct. But that doesn't happen every year.
Agreed.
It depends on the given year.
It's on the
and
mix.
So it depends on the mix.
Right.
And you get students moving in, students moving out, which impact it. And so some year, it could be that there is no new sections as students go from second to third to fourth to fifth. In other years, I think the year he looked at,
I think
this
that was
current
this year.
year, I believe it was either 2 or 3 sections that he felt were added as a result. And is that because of the student who joined us in kindergarten, or because of the student who joined us this past summer?
Doesn't matter. What matters is because of the program, for that particular academic year, there were sections added because of just the numbers worked. And your point is very valid. In
Yeah.
some years, that number
Yeah.
doesn't get.
Yeah.
It's just, for lack of a better word, in the future years, it's a crapshoot
And
over, what the section numbers are going to be.
correct. And at the end of the day, if you do the math of 72 students times 3,000, the program does not take money away. We don't spend tax dollars covering that program.
Well, you do this year,
Yeah, depending on the given year.
depending on the given year.
Well,
If that number was 300,000 and
Right.
3 times 72, you're not covering you're down by like 80,000 if the numbers hold
right.
in that given year.
Those are ifs, yes.
But you know what, so, I thank you for that.
Right.
But, and I guess I was confusing it. I'm looking at a quarterly meeting we had in November, and the Board of the Board of Ed review said that we were up 7.3 special ed teachers, I get that, but we were up 10.7 non-elementary and elementary certified teachers. And that was what was reviewed in the quarterly meeting in 11.
Saying that it was specific to that
No,
program.
it wasn't. No, that
No, it
was
wasn't.
my
Yeah.
error.
Correct, yeah.
I apologize. You're
And
correct.
most of that was related to those 7 sections that we forecast might have to be created over the summer, of which 6, and they were taken out of the budget, of which 6 actually had to be created. So
So
both.
we're not seeing that deficit in these numbers? Wouldn't we see a
in the-
deficit for an
In
extra
the
10?
reduced balance in the personnel is where you probably, quote, see it. We normally have a higher balance in personnel at this point in the year. So we have a lower balance as a result of that, as one of the factors of.
Yep.
Under
resulted in
instruction,
that.
okay.
We're going to go over to Mr. Mottola, and then we're going to go to Mr. Walsh. Yeah, go ahead. Then we'll go to Mr. Walsh. I think it's on this subject, right?
I want to stay on this subject.
Yeah. So go ahead.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mottola.
So if we can get those numbers again that Dr. Tracy talked about, I'd appreciate it and distribute it to our board. But I thought it was, we added 5 FTEs because of the open space system, but give me
Open
those figures.
choice.
Open choice. But if you can get me those as well, because, Mr. Ryder, I don't think you're saying that we take $3,000 in for all these 72 kids and we don't have an expense for them, are you? Because if that's the case, I'd ask Dr. Jones to do that analysis of every expense that we have for those kids, because there's expenses for these children. I don't think that this is a big profit maker. We're not making it.
Oh, no, I don't think it's a big profit maker.
No, because, I
But
mean, we have-
to suggest that one extra student who's sitting in a classroom that exists in front of a teacher that exists, with books that exist and supplies that exist, the marginal cost for that one extra student in a classroom is a very marginal extra cost.
Oh, for one, I would imagine, but for 72, and
Still, those 72 spread over 213 sections, it's still a marginal cost for that extra student in a classroom.
Maybe.
well, why don't we take a look at it? Why don't we have the administration take a look at that? That'd be great. That'd be a great analysis, actually.
And we have done that. We have it all available. I just don't have it in my head yet.
And if
so.
you could get Dr. Tracy's numbers that he had on what numbers he was talking about, I'd appreciate that. I mean, Ms. Munzel, you know those numbers right now. Do you have those numbers? Okay. The other thing I think we're not talking about is 72 students to a population that we have to start looking at school space. I mean, these students do take up space. I mean, so it's not like they're not taking up space, and we're talking about doing an addition to bring up to a 504 that's going to cost us $18+ million. Just after we did a Riverfield expansion, to get that up to 504, that cost us, off the top of my head, $16.5 million. Just like we're going to be talking about a expansion potentially at Mill Hill School, that with their challenged geography, is going to be a lot more than $18 million if we're talking about doing the same thing. I mean, that square footage cost is going to be through the roof based on all the steel and the geography that they have. So as we try to add students on, I don't believe that we should be looking at, oh, our population is going down, so we should be skyrocketing on the open choice program. Because it comes with a cost, and it's a cost that no one's talking about here, which is, we're going to continue to add on to population and want to expand schools. That comes to a cost to the town of Fairfield taxpayers in bonding and bonding and bonding. And it's just something we're going to have to look at.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh.
Fine.
Can we go to, go ahead, Mr. Becker. It's on this topic, I'm assuming?
It
'cause
is.
Mr.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. So, within the, I guess, the request for that information, if we can just make sure that any sort of data that you have on sort of following a student through that may go additional services, things like that, because obviously we've talked about the fact that that population may come in and then there may be somebody who we own sort of till the end there, and that in and of itself can cost a fair amount. So any sort of, not even necessarily the current population, but maybe some historical data, something along those lines to kind of graph that out for us. And I want to note that I agree with Mr. Walsh on the space concerns. And as I look at the presentation earlier with Holland Hill, we've embraced the 504, but there is a concern as we've continued to deal with the balance issues and as we've continued to embrace this, open choice to some extent coming in, it runs the risk that we're going to keep building space and the state's going to keep having all the problems and they're going to have solutions for it that are going to involve more and more. Wait a second, if we're funding all the cities at this, we can do it a lot cheaper. And by the way, you have extra space and you have a problem and you guys have continued to use this program. So all of a sudden the 70 number becomes 140 or whatever. But we've got all these seats that are as the enrollment projections seem to be really going down, and there's just all this excess capacity. It just seems like a lot of things converging that are not remotely in our favor from a cost perspective. And it's just very concerning, so I laid out there take, and
Thank you, Mr. Becker.
seeing it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Becker. Mr. Mottola, you've been
That's
quiet.
fine. I have some thoughts on that topic, but I'll wait till we get the paperwork so I can look at it. But I just had a question on the pupil personal expenses. Are you, on your chart, the special education tuition number, from what I'm reading here, you're anticipating getting some reimbursement from the state on this in the coming months, which will help those numbers. Is that fair? Okay, all right. That's all I needed to know. Thanks.
I'm going to go, okay, go ahead. Mr. Mottola, you go first, and then I'm going to turn it
I'm
over to
sorry,
Mrs. Leclerc.
On their chart on whatever page it is, the special education tuition deficit numbers you see there, and in the body of their presentation, under pupil personal expenses, there's an indication that
There's some more money coming.
there's some more money coming sometime in the next few months. We got a February payment, right? And then you get another one in May, right? Is that what usually happens? So that's going to help those numbers. You don't know what that figure is yet, do you?
Sorry?
Do you know what you're going to get from the state yet, or they're still
We're anticipating 3.4, 3.4.
3.4? Okay, thanks. That's it.
Okay, Mrs. Leclerc, did you have a follow-up to that?
Well, John confused me a little bit, so I just want to clarify. This, on line 21 of the chart, special education, or it's actually 22, the 449, that is because of additional tuition that we didn't budget for, and that's regular special ed tuition.
That's
And,
correct.
and we're expecting to, we think we may get reimbursed for a piece of that, or you've already factored that in when you calculated this number?
Yeah, on the page 1 of 2 that Mr. Mottola was referencing, it's the very bottom line, I believe, that you were pointing out, that $3 million deficit, which looks
Right.
really scary. What you're looking at on the more simplistic sheet is what we actually project that deficit to really be. Where we stand as of today. But again, special education tuition can change in either direction between now and June. We can have a student who was outplaced that comes back to us, and then we're not paying tuition, or we could have a student who gets outplaced, and we have a new tuition.
Remind us, what's killing us in this area? I'm sorry. Yeah.
So we're getting the $3 million, and this presumes we got the $3 million.
Already.
Okay.
All right. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Mary and I were looking.
Mary,
at
go ahead.
To follow up, in the news, we've read about Bridgeport charging for some of the magnet schools. Is that included in this number, or?
That's an FY18 issue.
Okay, so that's not this year, okay.
Right. What's killing us in special ed this year in terms of, I mean, the numbers are staggering that we're behind. If this is, I'm looking at your number here, and you're behind $700,000, right, of which $450 of it's tuition. Where did we err in our budgeting this past year?
Well, and I would say it's really not an error. It is an area of the budget
Right.
for public schools that you just don't know what you don't know. We can have one student move in that then needs special placement.
Right. I guess, and my apologies, you're correct. Error is a difficult word, and I'm not casting blame. That's not what I meant. There were assumptions made of what our special ed costs were going to be. Those assumptions are based on, it's very easy, it's based on rate and volume. Everything's based on rate and volume, right? So was it the rate that we were off on, or was it the volume of kids? Like, where were we off?
I would rather bring you actual numbers. If we're, maybe for FY18, we can dig into that a little bit.
Okay,
I
that's
can
fair.
say that number of outplaced students, based off the data that they've pulled for me since I've been here,
Right.
is not showing that the number of students is greatly increasing. It is the cost, the actual tuition cost.
So is that something where, would it be interesting to know on that, right? Is if they're charging, if the state, I assume the state is part of this charge, or who's charging us? The individual care facilities, are they private facilities? It'd be interesting to know what's driving the costs up, right? Whether there's more severe cases that we have, or whether they're actually charging us more money for the same level of care. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I was going to ask a question on that, or just, so that number there, on the chart, the numbers there, are they due to sending students out of the district? Or you just can't tell right now and maybe have to research that a little bit?
It's a good
The
question.
deficit.
Yes.
It is.
That's what, I'm assuming that all tuition charges is out of the district.
And so what is your, there was some discussion over the last couple budget sessions that we were going to try as a district to keep more and more students in district to save money. Are we still trying to do that?
I think it's always a goal to keep our students in their home school environment, always. That's what's best for children if it can be done, and so that's always our goal.
But is there a thought process of, even to the extent possible, and I'm not really that familiar with this, to the severe cases that actually, you know, may be cheaper to hire a teacher and pay a salary than send that student out to another district? I mean, something to that effect?
Yeah, I would say every school district in the country is analyzing that on an annual basis and trying to make sure that you have, you know, interventions and supports in place that will meet the needs of all the children in your district. It's a hard thing to do. You can have one child move in, for instance, who is deaf, and you may not have really what you need for that one child. So to team and staff for that one child, sometimes the parents will request that they're able to go, you know, to a school that can specialize for the hearing impaired or for the deaf. It just depends on your student body. It's an annual review.
Thank you.
Mr. Walsh?
At our next quarterly review, Ms. Leonardi had talked, what Mr. Mottola was talking about bringing some of the special education services in-house and making an investment. And the question I guess I have for her to look at or get a response from is, has that been profitable to us or not?
I don't know,
She had talked-
profitable, but have we saved
Well, I
money?
mean, have we saved money?
Okay.
Has that been a positive, a negative, a non-plus?
Yeah, I think you're talking about her description of the ESS program, and so I think that for Dr. Jones' benefit, who was not part of maybe that conversation, I believe it's the pluses and minuses of the benefit of the ESS program.
So if she can provide some type of analysis on how that's been working. And then the other question I have is on the open space. It had been represented at one of our quarterlies that, because we get extra money for special education of any of the open choice children above the 3,000, and that we hadn't been the best at billing it back. And I guess the question of, have we changed our processes for doing that? And are we getting a substantial amount of money in, or how's that been working?
Yes, we have changed it. We were billing for any special ed services above the $3,000 that we would receive. The last I checked, we hadn't received, we billed like at half-year point.
Sure.
Last I checked, we hadn't received it yet, but we obviously will make sure that we do get payment.
All right. And if you could just report maybe towards the end of the year where we stood with that and how much
Sure.
extra money we brought in from the previous year.
It's about $50,000, I think. this year.
50,000?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Leclerc?
To follow up on Jim's request, what I really don't understand or know too much about is our requirements for like special ed tuition and how that really works. Is there a way to explain to us, either tonight or in the future, what our requirements are and how those have changed over the years? Are there more stringent requirements that we have to comply with?
On the services provided?
On the services provided. And do we, how do we determine that? Like, do we just do what parents ask, or, you know, is it something that sometimes our district, because we're so large, we can provide, and can, like, do we have options there?
Well, I might just say, you know, as a reminder, special education is driven by federal law, and so we comply with the law. And there is a team of educators, includes the parents, an administrator, that helps make those placement decisions based off the data that they have and what's best for the child, and it is very much a team decision, and it's that way across the country. Now, I will say for funding, if you're watching the governor's budget, this is an area that could change on two different components, and one is the excess cost, which
Yep.
does does offset our special education funding. Right now, there's really no clarity as of today. We know that we're going to have over $1 million in reduction if the governor's budget were to pass. We're not really sure which direction the money even flows as of today. Depends who you talk to at the state level. The other thing, and I have mentioned this to the Board of Finance, I think on my first meeting, is we are watching very carefully residential placement. And that means it's a student who actually lives at the school residentially. We have always been responsible for the educational cost incurred, but we have not been responsible for the residential component. And if that, in fact, stays the way it has been pushed through this school year, that would be an additional $1 million in our budget that we would need to pay for next year for residential, that we have not had to pay previously. That is not in our budget.
Right. You good, Mrs. LaFleur?
And just to make sure, there's a prevalence rate of about 11%, give or take, of our 10,000 students. There's only about 70 or 90, 70 students who are outplaced, right, outside the district. The rest are served all within the district. And so when you're asking about what are the requirements for special education, were you referring to just the outplacement component of it, or the entire program? Just so that our staff can be prepared.
Yeah, just the tuition, what drives the tuition numbers, because I really don't know what's in there and I really don't have an understanding of it at all.
Can we amend, can I amend that? I'd like to know what we're paying for out, right? In terms of what our requirements are when we send them out. And actually, I think it'd be beneficial for us to understand the program as a whole and what the obligations are. As you can tell, look, we're facing a tremendous, and you guys are facing a tremendous tsunami coming for us on the economic side, right? We're very concerned, all of us, about being able to provide the services that we need to provide to special education needs as well as to the rest of our student body, including our gifted kids. So I think it's incumbent upon all of us to understand what our options are to provide it in the most efficient way. And when you look at the special ed budget as a percentage of your budget, what percentage is it? Do you know off the top of your head?
All in, about 25%?
Right.
Is
So
that a
it's
fair
about-
number, Mrs. Munsell?
Right. So
In
it's
terms of
about-
the figure that we report to the state?
Right, so it's about 25%.
Is that a fair number?
Right.
You would rather actually calculate it.
Okay.
Okay. I know from past years, or I don't know, but Mr. Dwyer, I would have quoted very similar to the same number you did. That's on 10% of the students or less, right? Because that's kind of the number that we have, about 10% of our kids are special ed kids, right? Receive special services, I want to put it, right? So 25% of that is going for 10% of the kids.
Are you looking for a response? Because I can't give you a response that you want.
No, it's not that I want, and it's not that I'm even criticizing it at all, because these are the kids that need it the most.
I would only encourage all boards who look at this issue or any other issue, conversations that cause people to say they're pitting special ed, and I know that's not what you're doing, but I only cautious the board.
No, you know what?
That
It's
as they
incumbent
talk
upon-
about it,
Look,
that
it's
they
in-
recognize, that they use phrases that recognize that each student deserves the education that they need.
There's no doubt that I think everybody does this, and I think that the funding of all our all the bodies towards this recognize that, right? No one is pitting anything against anyone. This is a community that's been targeted by the state to cut a bunch of money, and we're going to have to make some very difficult choices here in the next 45 days. We have to have honest conversations. We have to know what our options are. We have to know what our obligations are, and we have to look out for the benefit of everybody. No one on this board has ever pitted any group against another group, and I can't foresee that happening. But we have to have the conversations to understand better, as Mrs. LeClaire said, what are our obligations for services to provide, and are we providing them in the most efficient way possible, period. And that's all I'm saying.
And sorry to belabor this, but I know that's what you're saying, and I know that's what this board is saying, but occasionally language or questions can cause the public to view it differently because they have a different lens, because they don't work with this board all the time. So I think it's just an area that deserves caution. That's all I'm trying to suggest.
That's fair. I appreciate that.
Can I just add something?
Mrs. Pitko, sure, please.
We'll find out. Being on the Board of Ed, being an educator, and also being a parent of a student who has special needs, and being in education for as long as I have and having special needs students myself, my only warning is that as you go down this, remember that these parents are the most emotionally charged people who advocate for their kids rigorously. So if you start taking services away that aren't mandated, you might increase, I'm sorry to say, they might sue. They might sue. So you have to, they're going to take you to due process. So you have to worry that they're going to be on high alert if they think you start taking services away.
Thank God we're not the Board of Education then, because we don't get to make those decisions.
It's going down a rabbit hole. Okay?
Absolutely.
They watch the meeting, they'll start to get concerned that, oh my God, the Board of Finance wants to take money away from special ed
And nobody's
services.
saying that. What?
I just don't understand where this conversation came from. I really don't, but okay.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Sorry, I have to respond to Mr. DeWitt's comment. The Board of Finance discusses financial policies. At the Board of Education, we get to talk about people's children, and Ms. Pitko stated it very correctly. Mothers and fathers can get very emotional about the needs of their particular children. So the caution that I think both of us were trying to suggest is that that we don't have a set of conversations that cause parents to think that the Board of Finance is going in a direction which I know that you're not going in, but which over a TV, just hearing a conversation might cause people to think that.
Thank you.
That's all.
I appreciate that. Anybody else? Other questions related to this budget? Mr. Walsh?
Ms. Munzel, the runoff of the funds to pay the health from last, that we're running down, do you maintain that?
Yep.
Okay, where do we stand with that? Is that number on here anyplace that I've missed?
No.
No. Where do we stand with that number?
Bob was correct in the balance is around high 6 to like 725, somewhere around there.
Between high sixes and 725?
Yeah.
Okay. And you're seeing a rapid drop-off of the claims?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Becker?
So, just going back to the, the new chart where you kind of summarize some of the areas like, technology and maintenance. At this point, I mean, just this far along now, looking at this snapshot, but now also being almost 2 months beyond it. Are you looking at, when we see maintenance, things like that, that always gets to be a concern longer range. It's just going to cause, more expense next year, things like that. So, these numbers are we think holding true. you're just not going to be able to do, and they're just going to cause more things from next year to push out. This is just the constant deferral thing that we're dealing with. Well, some of them are technology things that, I don't know exactly what the details are in these. So maybe let's start with, can you break that out a little bit and just better? Well, yeah, but some of these capital things fit into longer range plans and aging equipment that, everything you defer out, has some other associated cost to it.
Well, and there probably isn't an easy answer because, and I didn't build this budget, but I do know that everything that's in the budget, if you ask the staff who run those departments, they believe they needed to be in the budget. So when you have a deficit of 1.3 million, you have to go inside your existing budget to find those reductions. And you go in and find them where you know you're not going to impede educational quality for children as much as you can. You look for those projects that are not attached to security, those a tripping hazard or something in a building. And so in doing that, some of our, we've cut back on some technology training. We've cut back on some equipment that we believe we are going to have to defer. We've also put off some software purchases. So that just kind of gives you an idea. It doesn't mean they're not necessary. They were in the budget because we felt we needed them. But that's kind of the lesser of the evil, I guess you could say, when you're looking at a budget and you're trying to make reductions.
Okay.
Any-
Well, yeah. Can you provide backup in more detail, particularly on the technology and the maintenance side? How's that?
And what part of that's capital? I'm more worried about what part is capital, frankly. Because in your budget notes, you say $900,000 of capital is in reserve.
Yeah. You're talking about on the maintenance side, that's that, it's 96,000 is what was equipment and technology, which is the capital. It's about 96,000 of that is capital on that technology line.
In the write-up, it says the capital budget is 2.5 million. Consequently, over $900,000 is in reserve to maintain a positive balance. Your third page of the write-up. I didn't know what that, 900.
I didn't catch that part, but yeah.
Not
that
of
adds-
just, not of capital in total. That total 900, that's referring to that total 909,000.
Oh, so that's not under capital, that's just a summation sentence.
that's a
Oh, okay.
summation.
I was going to say, that's a lot of
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
It's better microphones.
It was, yeah.
I think we have to hope the superintendent feels better. She sounds like she doesn't feel too good today.
So at least just for follow-up, just those two lines.
Anything else? Anything else, anyone? Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. We appreciate it, and we appreciate your comments. Thank you. Mr. Vahey, we're going to take a 5-minute break here, and then we'll get right to you and try to get you out of here. I thank you for your patience tonight. So a 5-minute break.
Yeah, I didn't need it.
Thank you.
dropping like flies. We'll call everybody back to order and restart the meeting. Are we all set? For Fair TV, are you all set? Great. So we're going to review the current status of the town's pension and OPEB funds like we do. Mr. Vahey, thank you for coming, and thank you for your patience in sitting through the other presentations this evening. So,
informative.
welcome to our world. Why don't we go right to the pension report, and then we'll go to the OPEB report, and we'll just, the Callan. Before we do, actually, thank you. So next week, we're going to see a report on the experience studies, correct? And the changes that are being recommended and accepted by the actuaries and the like. Is that correct? Can you tell us a little bit about what we're going to see?
The discount rate got changed from 7.5% to 7%.
Phased in, I would assume?
No, it's not phased in.
Oh, really? Okay.
Talked about that, and Mr. Mayor said that whatever's fine doing it with the one step. So, and there was a change in the amortization schedule for that bump in cost from
Okay.
15
Any
to
other
25.
big changes in the experience study?
No, I mean planned retirement ages changed a little bit, which is lumpy because we've had a fair amount of town employees recently retire, and then also same thing on the police and fire. And you know, they made a overall change, the actuaries, to inflation rate, which has two effects. It affects like our investment return, because investment return is like real return on top of inflation for a nominal. So that changed their projections, and it also the COLA things for future compensation. But none of those are really driving any big numbers, and I think it's kind of a wash, which is nice on both sides. And then, but I would say that, yeah, we don't generally change amortization schedules. We have changed to a 15 on both. Open-ended, last time we did this 5 years ago, and what we're doing with this is that jump in cost from going from the 7.5 to the 7, the board was persuaded to finance that over 15 years on a closed-end schedule, like a mortgage. So I wanted to keep it all the same, but I think the vote was like 8 or 9 to 2. So.
Okay. Anything else we should be aware of? They're coming next week. The actuaries are coming to present.
March 1st.
March 1st, right. Okay. Mr. Vahey, are you going to be here that evening as well?
Yeah, I can be.
Okay.
I believe. Look at my calendar.
Does anybody, yeah, right. Does anybody else have any questions on this specific? We'll wait till we hear it next week. Okay. So,
Mr.
yeah,
Becker
Mr.
was
Becker.
brave and sat through the whole thing.
Yeah.
I did, and I think on that front, knowing where this board has gone in the past and some of our previous discussions with that, I would like, and I can send sort of a couple of these things maybe in writing to the chair, but I'd like to see if we can request that they provide a couple of models so we understand what certain scenarios would have potentially looked like that the board discussed that were not available in modeling form last night. Because I think what's going to happen next week is we're going to go down paths we have, and then if we don't ask for this now, he's going to be here and he's not going to have it, and he's going to kind of. So I will put an email together either tonight or in the morning.
And copy Mr. Mayor and
I'll
myself.
CC yeah, through you to up the
Yeah.
right path. But yeah, I'll CC, and I think helpful, and I think obviously what they've done is probably done and be rolled up into the budget and whatnot. But I think that would be helpful for us, and so I'll put that together based on my feedback.
Thank you, Mr. Becker, and thanks for going to that meeting. Appreciate that.
Yeah, that would be wise based on, the board would probably have questions and they wouldn't be able to show it unless he knew ahead of time. So.
Great. Thank you. I'm assuming it's kind of a sensitivity analysis and the what-if scenarios of what you guys considered.
Yes.
Okay.
It's already been requested.
All right. Great. Go ahead. We'll turn it over to you, Mr. Vahey. Go right ahead.
The numbers for the non-OPEB, very similar, I believe, to the last time I was here, $350 million
Yep.
Yeah, it's as of December 31. I think it's up now. Returns on the last page.
Yeah, and you're well within your targets for the most part.
Yeah, we've been funding private equity, so that for the longest time we were waiting for Mesro to get going, and they finally did. So you'll see that the private equity, it used to be somewhere around like 1 to 2%. It's up to a little over 3%, and as it's gone up, we've taken money out of we call it vanilla domestic equity up the top, which was overweight in the past, and everything else is pretty in line. We are lower on hedge funds because we had DGAM liquidated or stopped doing a strategy, and so our cash balance is where that went, and we just picked it's not a hedge fund, but it's gives the same effect as a hedge fund, we hope, as far as a non-correlated type of asset, and I might add, not a very exciting asset class, but gives us a cash plus like 5% returns with very little volatility, and hopefully not a lot of downside risk. It's called a multi-asset strategy, and so it'll I don't know if we'll put it in its own category or we'll stick it in there with the hedge funds, but that we just selected the manager for that last night, which was Invesco. So you'll see, and they'll get the bulk of that cash, so cash will go down.
Okay.
Last page with returns. We've been trailing the benchmark. Part of that is some of our equity managers, and the rest I would say is probably about 10 or 20 basis points or 1/4% was probably also due to the cash that we've been carrying that we don't usually carry. But still, for the last 3 years, we've exceeded our benchmark, as well as 5 years and 7 years.
And we're still, for the last 5 and 7 years, we're still in that a little over 7% return range.
Yes, we went to 7%, like we said last night, for the future.
Okay.
Which, for reference sake, Callan gave us a study. I had thought that that would put us sort of at the 1/3 of our peers, or kind of 1/3 to the median, but it appears what actually puts us in the lower quartile. So, which is what we did last time. We're
more conservative.
Yeah, but our fund performs pretty well, so it's a good mix to have.
Questions from anybody on returns or on targets or anything related to the pension fund? Seeing none, let's go to OPEB. I think we can make this brief. Again, your targets are within range. Your targets are much broader here, given the amount of money you're dealing with.
Keeps creeping up. We're at 28 million. Yeah, not as much variance in the target, the returns versus the benchmark, because there's not a lot going on there. Most of them are ETFs or indices. And then you're asking your accountant about other municipalities and OPEB funding. From the actuarial side, they said that very few are actually funding. So the fact that we're at 20-something% of our ratio is pretty significant.
Mr. Fahey, I want to, and while I have you and Mr. Well, first of all, any questions from the board members on OPEB? One of the things that you and I have spoken about a number of times, and I'm going to raise it one more time in public, is the fact that your board is not involved at all in any of the management or any of the processes surrounding our, what do they call them, 403B plans in government?
Defined contribution plan, yep.
Yeah. But you guys are not involved in that at all?
Mr. Mayor, I thought I was going to be, you'd asked if I want to be involved in the selection of the RFP that went out, or the managers for that. I was open to it. I'm not sure what the timeline is there. I know the RFP went out a while ago, and then, and I agree that you could use the whole board to help with that, because we're just gluttonous for punishment, and we're already fiduciary, so it kind of takes the onus off of you and the town. But
You're right, but you haven't been involved at all?
No.
Yeah. Mr. Mayor, I know you're spending a fair amount of time on this, and it's not a critique of you or whatsoever, but I do think if we have a board in place, and I don't know what has to go through, whether the RTM or whatever, but having been involved in defined contribution plans myself and served on these boards, I would be very careful and make sure that you get the right people involved. And I think if you have a standing board, I would avail yourself of those resources. Because I'm just concerned, because there's a heck of a lot of liability when you're responsible for the defined contribution plans. So, you know.
Yeah, no, you know, as you know, or maybe you don't know, I don't know, we've been working on,
I don't know. I don't know anything.
okay, then I'll start from scratch. It's been several months that we have internally have been, we put together an RFP for both, for three subsets of proposal, or potential proposals. One, our probably our least favorite choice, and probably one that will be selected, is an all-in-one company, somebody who does it all. There's basically three areas of service that needs to be required. We need a fiduciary, a co-fiduciary, we need an investment manager, and we need a record keeper administrator. So we sent an RFP that encompassed anyone who did fiduciary only, people who did record keeping only, and people who do all three. It's putting together the RFP, getting everything in there that's necessary to get in there, to make sure that you are getting proper answers, complete answers, so that we can fully, I guess, work in a way that optimizes the return and to the members, the costs, reduces the cost to the members, and make sure we get in some, independent fiduciary control eventually. Not control, but input and advice. We've gotten RFPs, and when I spoke to Mr. Vahey about, and we reviewed them, we've had some interviews. When I spoke to Mr. Vahey about a month ago, because of all the activities going on, things take longer than we hoped. Then when we got it down to some kind of manageable number, we were going to invite him and a member of the unions, police and fire, and a member of the town unions to come in and join us to go over the final 3, 4, or 5 people that we select in each of those categories to make a final selection. So generally, and then if we want to turn it over to the board of the Joint Retirement Investment Board at that time, and that's, I mean, no problem with that whatsoever. I appreciate and understand Mr. Beatty's comments about, people do a lot of work, but this required an incredible number of hours, a lot of work, a lot of effort, and I'm not sure that it would have been done, but maybe it would have, just depending upon volunteer.
I don't even, I understand that the RFP process has to be driven by somebody who's a full-time employee as opposed to volunteers. I totally get that. What I'm referring to is the ongoing stewardship of the plans. And the
Right,
fact
that's the goal, to turn it over when we're going to have a co-fiduciary, which is going to be somebody that's an RIA, someone that does this professionally.
Sure. You always do.
Yeah.
I mean, companies do that too.
Right.
But they routinely have,
Right.
a group set up within their
Right.
own company
Right.
that works with those outside professionals.
Well, right, because the mechanism that's different with our pension versus the DC plan is that there's an education piece.
Correct.
We could invite all the employees and police and fire to come to our board meetings, and maybe we could educate them. But that's why an RIA, that's the bulk of that role for them. That's the difference between the DC and the DB,
Right.
the pension plan. So
Anyway, so it's, so the work needs to be done, and then turning it over, the town needs to have a co-fiduciary.
Yes.
I don't know if legally, if there has to be one in administration. Most towns do have one in administration. I don't know if that's a requirement. I would think, well, the
You have
town
to
is
have
the
an-
fiduciary.
You have to have an administrator.
Gotta have an administrator that's the fiduciary.
Yeah. All right, yeah.
I'm not,
Yeah.
it's just good management.
Yeah, no, that's what we're trying to do. That's what we are doing.
I haven't seen any evidence of it.
Takes time.
I just have a question that's a little bit out of turn. It was really around the accounting review, the audit review.
Yeah.
Why was there so much fascination on the AAA rating?
In terms of what?
Well, it seems like it was like a big source of angst that we might lose our AAA rating and become.
No, there's no angst. It's just a
yeah,
it's just a
like
comment.
15 basis points at best of a cost to the town, which I don't know how much bonding we have, but like on 50 million, that's like 75 grand. So it's.
Appreciate
I mean,
it.
I always like to be a AAA town, but it wouldn't be the end of the world if you dipped one year and then went back the next year. So. I was
Thank
just
you,
kinda
Mr.
curious.
Behe. All right. Any other questions, comments?
Although isn't it, dwell on that one, but if you dip 1 year, the problem is actually it's a lot harder to get back up, though I do understand your point on the costs and whatnot. But isn't it, to get it is considered to be?
No. I mean, I work with I mean, I've half of my coworkers are from rating agencies. I mean, it's just a review schedule.
Thank you, Mr. Behe. Appreciate it.
I do, on the,
OPEB or on
find
the contribution plan?
Yeah, I mean, just that if anything related to, I mean, maybe we're able to hand it over to the board without the legislation, but we probably need to do that, and
Charter
I
or
would
something,
note.
yeah.
Well, I mean, it just potentially just through legislation with the RTM, but that 2 points. One, it takes it takes time to draft it, takes several months to get it through, plus even if you started now, you might be running up against the summer, and that all legislation dies at the end of the term and then has to literally start from scratch. So if there's an interest in trying to do that, it would probably be one of those conversations you want to have that you either say, I'm going to do it in the next RTM, or I'm going to start it in the next month or two and try to get it done by the end of this particular term. So just for the administration, for if this board's interest, it's, just the timetable's there, and I think before we just hand it off, I think there's got to be, the legislation probably has to be done, so.
It's a good
Thank
point.
you.
I want to take that conversation.
Mr. Walsh?
I will say in regards to the AAA, I think it's a great source of pride for this community that we have it, and I can't stress that enough. That to be downgraded is not a great thing. It's not a great optic. It's harder to get back up, and I think I say all the town bodies spend a lot of time budgeting conservatively to get that, and it's kind of a source of pride. And to start going off into certain areas just because we could save money, it's only going to cost us $75,000 more bonding. I don't think it's the place we want to go. I think we'd like to. I think it's a source of pride. I know it's a source of pride for this board, and for the town as a whole.
I get it. I just saw that gnashing of teeth, and I just, the world would not stop. So just, And
Agreed.
I think our tax base is fine, and we'll get back to a triple, but whatever. But
And I definitely don't want to get back to a fund balance of 5%. And I don't want to sit here and listen to a previous first selectman tell us that's where we should be when it was never where we should have been. When we were probably off by, Mr. Centofanti said we should be 12 to 15%. And we had our first selectman who was selling us down the road saying, 5% or even under that's okay.
And that's the rainy day- that's
And
a
let's
rainy
use
day
fund
fund,
balance.
right?
And let's use fund balance towards reducing taxes. I don't want to get to those days again.
Me either. I don't want to see a lot of things from the past come back.
Thank you.
Thanks. Have a good evening.
Yes, for the purposes of the public, the town is in no danger of losing its AAA.
Yeah. All right.
That's the most important one.
That's right.
Next one, to review the town's Q2 financial position. Go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
I'm gonna
Turn it over to you.
Turn it over to Ms. Bossi, as usual. But I'm going to start by apologizing for having issued a report with an error in it, the summary, executive summary page. And I'm going to pass out the corrected report. There's, due to a communication, minor communication, miscommunication in the department, when I evaluated the tax,
When you evaluated what, I'm sorry?
tax collections.
Got it.
Variable, on budget, not on budget. And when the controller and I spoke, I basically indicated that there was no favorable or unfavorable balance to report at this time. In my analysis, I include senior tax relief. It was thought by the others that senior tax relief was included because that is a tax item. So the first item under revenue, senior tax relief, got excluded from the schedule that went out originally, and I didn't catch it when I reviewed it. So that's the only change in this schedule. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Bossy.
Just on that document itself, just if you could, just make sure that please, that it gets onto the website under the backup area for the specific meeting, because I know this is kind of this is probably one, out of all the documents, one of the real drivers here, so if someone's looking at it from another board, you know that, they've got the right one, because yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
So having said that, I guess we'll start with that summary sheet. Again, the only difference between what you received last Thursday or Friday is this top line of the senior tax relief.
Yep.
Mr. Meredith spoke about, the 470. A lot of these other numbers you're going to see are familiar because you've been seeing them since September.
Exactly. What's the new information, Ms. Bossy?
The state revenue, which you may or may not know, because as of Q1, that number was not as negative as it is now. But you guys were informed of that 570 or so.
In December.
Yeah. Yep. So the state revenue, going to the second piece, is at negative 3292. There's an Exhibit A right behind, I believe, what you received that kind of itemizes out. Clearly, that biggest one is the ECS grant.
Yep.
So that was previously the 1925, but in December, we had learned that that's now a negative 2496. That's the biggest change, really.
Yep.
From the state number. The rest you could see, that's just the box column gets you to the negative 3292.
Yep.
Okay. Park and Rec revenue. Previously, it was reported to be a favorable around 2. The projection now is like a 258. And on the detailed sheets, you could see which exact items kind of foot to the 258. Again, this is on the revenue side.
Yep.
Investment income, negative 215. That's a new number, I believe, you haven't seen.
Yeah, what's going on there? What's driving that?
After the election, the 10-year basis points went up about 85. Excuse me, the 10-year rate went about 85
Right.
basis points.
Right, so it's a change in rate that's
a change
driving
in
it.
rate.
There's no change in cash balance or anything like that.
Yeah,
It's-
we we anticipated some of this. We're very short. Some of that's been recaptured.
Okay.
We'll see how it turns out at the end of the year.
Okay.
And the other is a bunch, again, on the sheets with the comments, you can see total up to the various 241, some negative, but netting out to a slightly positive variance for everything other than basically the taxes, state revenue, Park and Rec, and investment.
Yep.
So on the revenue side, we're anticipating unfavorable 2.5 as of Q2. On the expense side, again, a lot of these numbers you've seen 2 or 3 times now, the 2016 carryovers, the contingency, the contribution to surplus, the 207 from ops, and the BOE number changed slightly given our updated actuals, and there was an additional refunding expense. But basically, the top three items you guys transferred over to debt service to use for debt service this year. And
Yeah.
the 230 was just a one-off from a refunding. Clearly, there were savings over the life of the bond. And that BOE number is the internal service fund that we kind of already talked about?
That's what we talked about earlier.
Yep. So those items foot to the 1.7. And the next little expense section is the fiscal 17 operational savings. And again, you've seen a lot of these numbers as well. We'll talk about vacancies in a minute, but you've seen these are basically the holdbacks, or
Right.
what was asked a while ago. The 40 from the assessor, the 75 from the assessment, 50 from legal for labor, various capital items. I think they were all itemized out in a letter, from paving and some trucks. Library 100, fire was 75, and again on that other detailed sheet, the other totals to a 104 from various smaller balances.
And again, as I recall, and I know the first selectman is here, we talked about this previously, some of these savings, if we get through the winter without big issues, if we get closer to the end of the year, we can implement some of the things here that we're held back on right now. So this isn't necessarily permanent savings, it's basically timing to wait to make sure we don't have any other oopses in the budget, correct? I see the first selectman shaking his head, and you guys as well. Okay.
Vacancy number?
Yeah.
302. It's various, mostly department head turnover and people budgeting because
churn.
of the timing. Budget number and new hires.
Are we holding back on, I know you held back on your part-time position. Is that happening throughout the town where we're holding back on hires? We are. Okay. Okay, so there's, go ahead.
Is that expected, I'll ask the first selectman, is that expected to last through June 30th? Are you still are you planning on keeping a hiring freeze through the end of the year?
Thank you. The hiring freeze was implemented to make sure we got through the bulk of the year and knew where we were when things like the 570 hit in December, a few other things going on, questions in state aid from LoCIP to whatever. We want to make sure we got through that. So that's what we've done, and we'll make a determination as we go forward as to when we make any adjustments there. At the moment, we are very carefully reviewing that. As much as it's a freeze, we are reviewing that to make sure if we can save money by bringing somebody on, we are going to do that. If we have a critical position like the assessor, we will do that. So that's not a hiring freeze, thou shalt not do anything. It's basically we are reviewing each one very carefully, and to some degree, if nothing else, just stretching out the process so we save some money in the interim.
Okay. Are the assessor and collector the only two department heads out, or is there more?
I want to say yes.
There's an interim at Parks.
Interim in Parks and Rec.
Interim and Park and Rec, okay, so it's just, but the people that we don't have someone for is the collector and the assessor, and we have an interim.
Collector starts on Monday.
Starts on Monday, so we filled that position. Okay.
Any other items? Does anybody have any questions on the schedule? This is the bulk of the schedule, and thank you.
Is there a way to get a vacancy breakdown of that?
Can we see a little bit of the churn, what positions are left unfilled?
We have
You have a handout on it?
Perfect.
Can we take a look at that quickly?
So while
This-
he's doing that, subtotal, the 3 million,
Right.
net estimated variance 644. If you add in the 550 from surplus, it's about a $1.2 million estimated increase in fund balance.
And you're absolutely right, this is largely driven by the turnover in all the department heads.
Are we having to pay the department heads more than they were budgeted for?
IT director, yes. HR director, yes. Purchasing director,
Yes.
Yes. Well, we haven't hired an interim direct director. Assessor will also be yes.
And what do you think the drivers for that are? Because in past years, specifically, I think when we hired the last assessor, we went down because Mr. Brown had a number of years of experience.
We had
And tax collector, I thought we went down. It seemed to be that we had had a lot of long-serving people, and when we hired new people,
Change in benefits.
well, that's what I want to address. Is that the reason? Okay. Is there-
That's an active part of the negotiations, much more so than it's been in the past.
So it's costing us a lot more money because we don't have, because we go into the 501A?
I'm going to let Mr. Mayor finish the balance of this, but let me give you the headline.
Sure.
It's taking longer. We're having more people drop out of the process because you're not going to hire somebody from another town, as we have in the past. And when I say you're not going to, I don't mean 100%, but the likelihood of getting somebody from another town when they're in a pension program at a different medical program and have them come over here without a pension, without that, is less than likely. And if you go back and look at some of the recent hires we had before that changed, Mr. Michelangelo, Mr. Carey, in conservation, the idea that we would, in particular, those folks probably wouldn't have come to the town at the time they did if we couldn't offer comparable benefits. And our benefits right now are not competitive. But I will let Mr. Mayor take it from there.
Well, there's not much more to say. I mean, Kerry and Michelangelo both told me that they would not have come if we didn't have if the town didn't have a defined benefit plan when they came aboard. No, the pension plan is a hindrance. We've lost some good candidates because of it, but we've ended up with excellent candidates so far in all our hires.
So it's just taking longer, and we're having to pay them more?
Correct.
I do want,
Approximately how much do we have to pay them more? Because because at some point you do the analysis, and it's just...
That's hard to quantify.
Is it?
yeah, and you made a comment before that I want to disagree with, because your comment was, well, it's costing us more money.
Mm-hmm.
You can't say that right now. It's costing us more money in salary.
Yeah.
Right? It should be saving us a heck of a lot more money in the long term. And it's also de-risking the town from the market risk of defining their benefit versus just defining our contribution.
I guess the question is can we do an analysis to figure it out? Because we start at a higher rate with them, then we're going to be going up from that higher rate.
You absolutely are.
Yeah.
But
I don't
again,
know
it's
what-
the whole concept between a defined contribution plan and a defined benefit plan.
Yeah.
Who bears the risk and how much is it costing?
Mhm.
So just like you can't say that we're saving a lot of money on it right now,
Mhm.
right? Although we did do an analysis, there was an analysis done a number of years ago that said it takes about 7 years to actually flip into saving money. Now, whether those same assumptions hold true or they don't hold true, I don't know. What I'm saying is you can't sit here and say it's costing it, or don't sit here and say it's costing us more money now.
And
Or-
it's-
or
and
that it's costing
and I
us
remember
more
that
money.
7-year number, but it's interesting. If you're having to pay them more salary with a steady increase over time and longevity things and all sorts of other things, I question whether it's 7 years anymore. It's actually stretching that savings out.
Those were all factored into the 7-year number.
It was that we were going to be paying them more money? I don't remember that being
every-
a factor at all.
It was when we did this before you were on the board, actually.
I was
When
on the
we're
Board of
Mr.
Selectmen when we were talking about it.
Yeah, but there was a 7-year number as to the break even, and then it was supposed to cost less money.
And your assumptions at that point in time said, oh, we're going to be paying somebody just to get them in the door 10, 15, 20% more.
My assumption?
No, not your assumption, the assumption that was made to get to the 7-year break-even point.
My understanding was yes, but that was a long time ago. And I'm not, by the way, I'm not disagreeing with the fact that there should be a study done, which will be based on all these assumptions. Totally get that. What I'm saying is, just like I won't sit here and say we're saving money, I also won't sit here and say we're losing money based on the starting salaries, because this is a long-term play, right?
Mhm.
What you're doing is you're transferring risk to the employee.
Yeah.
relative to their investment selection
Mm-hmm.
that you don't have to bear on an ARC and all that. That's what you're doing.
And
That's
we're
what
also-
this does.
We're also, based on what's being represented, transferring them more cash and salary
Absolutely.
every day.
Absolutely. That's the difference between the private sector and the public sector. There's no question about it.
And I guess the question is can we do an analysis to figure out, is it worth it? Because if it's also hindering our ability to bring people in, or quality people, I'm not saying that the people we haven't hired are quality, so I want to be very clear about that.
Thank you
Everyone
for that.
Everyone
Right.
we brought in, I don't think we're bringing, I think we're getting good people. It seems to be taking longer, and it seems based on these last 4, that we're having to pay them over what the previous person was making.
Sure. And you will, and you'll
And-
continue to.
I know, and it just, I guess I question whether we should do an analysis on it.
I'm not saying we shouldn't. I'm just saying the fact pattern is absolutely correct on everything that's being said on this. Yeah, Mr. Becker.
I mean, but, fine to do an analysis to some extent, but I mean, the other part is that we've sort of taken this plunge. I mean, we didn't do it on the police and fire side, but for everything else, you've got employees now that are starting in one path, so if they were to, I mean, would we reverse this decision for department heads only, as an example, and then an employee works for the town, then they become a department head, and now they move into this fund? No, at this point, they're over here. Do we say, but only a handful? I mean, I think it was sort of the last step was taking this away there and knowing that there were some realistic elements that we were going to have to do to compete, but that we made the decision to sort of, in as many places as possible, to get away from it, and that was the reality.
Thank you, Mr. Becker.
Yeah, I think if you were looking at a hybrid, which is one of the considerations at the time, I'm not sure it was fully discussed, was that internally, if somebody's on the pension program, they stay on the pension program.
Hmm?
So that's a very simplistic. It's only if we're bringing somebody in from the outside. There are certain positions that frankly aren't necessarily private sector positions. The idea, if you're competing in the private sector, you're less worried about that because it's just dollars, it's just the salary dollars.
Sure.
If they're positions that aren't primarily private sector, then, the hybrid model would say if they're on an existing pension program in another town, you bring them over into your pension program. So you're competitive for those positions that are what I'm going to call municipal type positions. They're not readily competitive in the private sector. We're not doing it right now. It's black or white with us. You're either in our pension program now, or you're not going to be in our pension program.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
The normal cost on the town side is like, I think with the new discount rate, I think it's 14%. We're paying 5% contribution, so it's 9%. The difference between the 14 and the 5 that we contribute to the defined contribution plan. So, given that simple arithmetic, if you have to pay someone more than 9% greater than you would otherwise, you lose. If you pay them less than 9%, you win.
Right. But there's
The
also a
other
lot of
side
other
that is
assumptions with it.
You're talking about the department head group, and so you may be losing on the department head, but as Mr. Becker pointed out, it's the entire town employee group. So
Right.
it might be costing you extra and more difficult to attract department heads. But the general workers normally coming in at an entry-level basis, and those are, and the issue, and those are unionized positions, and we're not having the difficulty at that level. So overall, you might end up saving money, even though it costs you money at the department head level.
I think on the entry-level job, or bringing somebody in there, it's much easier to tap into the private sector and get into that market, if you will, for jobs. It's really, the issue is at the department heads when it's what I call a municipal-based position. So when you're looking at IT, let's say, that's pretty generic out there in the private sector, that type of thing. when you're looking for somebody who's a DPW director, that's just not something that's necessarily available in the private sector. Not that there's not some private sector experience, but you're really looking at somebody who's managed a public works department in a town as your primary source. If you can promote somebody internally, great. If you can't, other towns are your primary source of recruits.
And the four that are on here are really in that
Correct.
generic category. IT director, HR director, purchasing director, those are, you have to deal with the private sector influence there, so. And by the way, just doing it in my head, they're all within 10 or 20% of the budgeted salary, so if that number's true that you mentioned, 10 to 20%, it seems that we're in that delta anyway, right?
Yep.
Just in regards to the internal component, we've gone external for a lot of people. I would hope that the town could start working towards the internal promotions into the department heads. Not necessarily right away, right? I mean, you're dealing with a previous administration and whatever they did, but longer term arc for the town, trying to make that path, or at least working very hard in places like a DPW, and now if somebody leaves, it's going to be that much harder to get somebody. What can we do to deepen that bench and have people groomed and have that succession line as best in place, as we can?
Yeah, let me clarify that misinterpretation or misunderstanding directly for both this board and anybody at home. We have not tried to go outside. We have gone outside. We've opened it up to people inside, and we have one goal in mind, to get the best available person to fill that slot, whether from inside or outside. There is no bias. We are not trying to go one way or the other. We make sure that folks on the inside. However, when you run as lean as we do, there isn't necessarily an assistant ready to step up.
Right.
When you look at the criteria, and specifically, let's take something like DPW director, the person I thought most likely to fill that role from the inside is not a professional engineer. That role, defined by charter, needs to be a professional engineer. So that the inside options were not available. And as we looked at other departments, certainly things like human resources, where you have the tremendous background of somebody coming in who's been involved in human resources and run other departments, we don't necessarily have an assistant human resources director that's fully fluent in everything taking place. So as we look at those, that's part of the challenge going out. But I want to be absolutely clear, we're looking for the best available person. There's not a bias towards the inside. There's not a bias towards the outside. That is not one of our criteria and not something we weight.
Thank you.
One other quick comment on that.
Just helpful disclaimer, I know where you're coming from. My opinion still stands individually in regards to the concern from a costing and all that. That's all. But I understand where you're at.
Go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, I just want to
Thank
say
you,
also,
Mr.
like, with respect to the assessor and the tax collector, we have very capable deputy tax collector and very capable deputy assessor, neither one of whom wanted to be the director.
Well,
But they're very capable of what they do.
Look, let's be clear, and I know this to be true, because you've updated us enough. You've run a wide-open process to include both internal and external candidates, the goal being to get the best candidate to fill the position. In some instances, as Mr. Tetro points out, there wasn't somebody qualified inside because of either charter regulations or what have you, right? And when you've had to go outside and get a new employee versus just promoting from within, the fact that the pension is no longer available has been a concern to get somebody from another municipality. It's taken longer, and it's cost more money in the short term at least on their salary and what have you. Yet to find out whether that's going to cost you more money over the long term as compared to the savings of having a defined contribution plan versus a defined benefit plan. Fair enough?
Left one part out.
Say it again?
You left one part out, which you'd mentioned earlier, the risk transfer.
And the risk transfer, which I thought I said earlier, so I didn't need to say again, but you're right. Exactly right. Thank you. Anything else? Any other questions on this? We've got a couple other items that I think we need to cover tonight. It didn't come up, but there's two things, and I'm going to cover it under kind of hear, consider, and act upon any communication. I'd like an update, if we might, on the General Electric situation in terms of the transfer of the property and any risk associated with the revenue for the remainder of this fiscal year as the remainder of next fiscal year. Then the second thing was, and this is new, and I got a couple calls from board members who read one of the local press outlets earlier today and saw some information on something going on down at the transfer station or the dump related to any potential liability and some problem with a contractor. And quite frankly, it's the first I've heard about it, and I don't know whether others have heard anything about it, but it seemed to be that there could be some financial exposure. So if we could just go through those two items, I think it'd be very helpful. Let's start with GE revenue.
I'll take the first one. On December 20th, 2016, the tax assessor received a letter from attorney Michael Larobina, the general counsel of Sacred Heart University, which enclosed its Form M-13 tax exemption return. In the letter, the university claimed that the property should be exempt from taxation by the assessor as of the date that Sacred Heart University purchased the property on December 16th, 2016, pursuant to Town Ordinance Section 95-24, which was passed, I believe, in 1953. Therefore, Sacred Heart University is claiming that it should be exempt from taxation on the October 1st, 2016 grand list as of December 16, 2016. In a follow-up conversation with attorney Larobina, he also informed us that Sacred Heart University does not believe he should have to pay the tax bills dated January 1st, 2017 and April 1, 2017, which represent the second half of taxes due on October 1 on the October 1, 2015 grand list for a time period when GE owned the property. We have researched and reviewed both of these issues with our attorneys. First, the tax assessor has confirmed in writing to SHU that it owes payment for the outstanding tax bill dated January 1st, 2017. Second, the tax assessor informed SHU that a tax-exempt organization only becomes exempt from local taxation by Town Ordinance Section 95-24 when the tax-exempt organization actually begins to use the problem exclusively for its qualified tax-exempt use or commences construction at the property. Therefore, the property will be exempt from taxation on the 2016 grand list as of the date that Sacred Heart University begins to exclusively use the property for its tax-exempt use or when SHU commences construction at the property. Based upon our position as to both of these issues, we are confident that Sacred Heart continues to owe the taxes due to the town in fiscal year 17, as well as a portion of the taxes for fiscal year 18.
Assuming they don't start construction or something, right?
No, that's whether they start or not.
Okay.
That conclusion has been communicated in writing to SHU.
And you went out and got outside tax counsel to assist in this?
Correct. We interviewed several firms. We ended up with Bircham Moses, a guy named Mario.
So Sacred Heart's position right now is that they don't owe taxes starting this fiscal year?
Correct. Starting, yes.
And then our position is you owe taxes to the town until such time as you physically start using the facilities on that land for not-for-profit.
Our position is they owe taxes through approximately, I don't have the exact date, but September 15, 2018.
And why is that the right date?
It's the taxes that are collected right now are from the 2015 grand list.
Right.
So they owe, we feel, very confidently that they owe us all the taxes for the 2015 grand list. Those are the taxes that are due and payable through June 30th, 2017.
Right.
So then we go to the 2016 grand list. The conveyance transfer was December 16. The grand list is effective October 1. So we're quite confident that they owe us that pro rata of a year, October, November, half of December, which would be July, August, half of September.
Okay. And,
Thank you.
and the tax attorney you selected out of, you went and interviewed other tax attorneys and,
Yeah, yes.
okay?
I was quite diligent there.
So, in any event, though, we originally thought when we came into this,
When I initially reported to the board, based upon the conversations I had with our then assessor, the information I supplied to the board would have been true and accurate based upon state legislation. The assessor nor I were aware of the town ordinance, which allows for a tax-exempt acceleration
so when
from
we,
a transfer to commercial to a nonprofit entity.
so when we originally came into this thinking that there would be no economic impact in the next budget year that we're looking at,
Correct.
that's inaccurate. There's going to be an implication in the best-case scenario, right, based on your tax review and your discussion with the tax attorney, of how much in the next fiscal year.
Correct, because of this.
Well, it wasn't correct. I was looking for a number. How,
I'm sorry, maybe I
Yeah.
didn't understand.
so, we originally were told, and I'm not, right, we were originally told
You were originally told based on state statute, and then we have this.
that we're going to be
town
fined
ordinance.
for fiscal year 2018. There's
That is
no
correct
economic
statement.
impact
Correct.
other than the personal property that is gone,
Correct.
right? The real property, the real estate property is there, taxable, they got to pay on it for the rest of fiscal year 2017 and the rest of fiscal year 2018. That's what we were originally told. Now, because of this ordinance, because of everything else, it's gone back and said, that turns out to not be true. They're going to have to pay for 2017. They're going to have to pay a portion of 2018. That's our position as a town, right?
Correct, yes.
How much are we then going to lose in the next budget cycle?
Oh, how much are we going to lose?
Right.
Give me a hint. Should I turn it on? Wrong answer. We're going to lose about 1,267,000.
Okay. So we went from thinking we had 1.5 million, we lost 1.2 million. And we can suspect that Sacred Heart's going to fight this for a while, based on their position.
We're pretty, there's Supreme Court case, we're pretty, I mean, I've learned a lot more than I ever wanted to about tax law in the state.
Right.
But we're very confident that they owe the money.
I'm just saying they're going to fight it. I mean, they're not going to just say they owe it.
But they won't get building permits if
They're going to have to pay it, and then they'd have to take an appeal, I think.
I guess. Yeah, but we'll lose it then. I mean, if they prevail,
We'd have to, right.
right.
On the timeline, though, you're saying that they owe through September of 17?
18.
Through 8?
Through September of 17, which is fiscal year 18.
18. Okay, that was what I was, okay. September in fiscal year 18, which makes more, okay. Thank
Right.
you.
Do we have any other questions? Mr. Walsh?
Have you explored with tax council, what, would it change anything if the RTM repealed that 1950 statute?
We heard it was it 1950s or 1990s?
Whatever year, what year was that?
1953.
1953, that's what I said.
Or 55.
Okay, Mr. Tetral told me that there was another statute.
93?
I don't know. I thought you said it was the 50s.
I was originally told it was the 50s, and through conversation with Mr. Tetra, he told me it was the 90s.
Whatever the applicable statute is
Right.
that Sacred Heart is relying on.
Just read a statement that said 1953.
Maybe it was 1993, 1995. Maybe it was 1993? 20 years
Regardless
ago?
of year.
1993.
Regardless of the year,
Yeah,
but
okay,
you should
yeah.
have it for your case.
Yeah, it's- Give me my computer, I got it.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
checked.
Now I'm
It's
confused.
his fault.
Yeah. Bob, you went back and checked. It was the early 90s. We talked about the makeup
Okay,
of the
1993.
RTM. Some of the names on the RTM were familiar. So it wasn't the early 50s before I moved to
Right.
town. It was,
So the question, I guess, is, have you explored with tax council if the RTM were to, say, immediately repeal that tax code, because it's a local code, right?
we did
Would-
it to ourselves.
Would that change the opinion? Could we potentially,
It's not a question that's been asked or a
can you
comment
ask
that's
that
been
and get
offered.
a legal response back?
I will ask that question.
Because since it hasn't been paid yet, maybe there's a possibility to either amend it or to repeal it
I would
and
assume
then
the
make them
transaction
responsible.
happened when the ordinance was in effect, but I'll ask the question.
It may,
Lawyer.
it may, but it may not.
And I didn't sleep at Holiday Inn last night.
And repeal it retroactively.
You've never stayed at a
Back in
Holiday Inn, Bob.
Connecticut, so, hey.
He looks more like a Howard Johnson's guy.
Red Lion.
Right. All right, any other questions, comments on this? All right, so I want to go to the next issue, which is new. Mr. Tetra, thank you for coming up to the mic. Give us tell us what's going on, because I know there was a couple of public meetings over the last few nights when I was out of town.
About this.
I know there was an article in one of the press outlets today. I know there's been some concern raised over any potential financial impact to the town on this. And quite frankly, I was completely in the dark on it, and I don't know if others were as well. So, if you wouldn't mind.
Yes, we've had, for the last approximately 3 years, we've had a outside contractor run what is known as the Public Works Yard. It's a place where we have been, the town has for the last, I'm going to say 50 years, as just an approximation to give the idea that it has been going on for a long time, where things have been brought to, both out of our Public Works yard, the spoils, as well as, to some degree, certain private contractors and certain town projects. The idea was to get that material away at a minimum cost. There's a contractor brought in to do that. They basically kind of sold us on the idea of moving, combining that with a lot of clean soil that they'd bring in from the outside to get it to a point where that could be then moved off-site, but in essence have a market value by being able to use that as fill under certain parameters. And all this is kind of measured and determined based on the quality and testing of that. That agreement was coming to an end on December 15th, and we notified the contractor in September that we would be ending that agreement because we weren't happy with the progress they were making on removing that soil off-site. In fact, it seemed to be getting bigger to some degree. 2 days or 3 days before that was supposed to end, we started testing the soil. The agreement with the contractors, they own any of the contaminations that they bring on. Starting in September, we started testing that on a regular basis. We brought in an LEP, licensed environmental professional, to do that testing. They were testing it every week. In December, I'm going to say approximately December 14th, we got a test back, and the test was taken on 11/29, that there was some contamination. We immediately shut down the site, notified DEEP, brought them down, take a look to determine how contaminated, how much, and make sure we followed whatever rules and regs. While working with DEEP, DEEP has basically turned it back to us, said it's not that contaminated. They'll keep us updated in terms of what's going on, but sort it out. We're currently are doing additional testing at the site. It looks like it's of the 100,000 cubic yards that are on site, it looks like it's about 2,000 cubic yards that might be contaminated.
they've tested all over the 100,000 and said that only 2,000?
No, they've done some sample testing around it all, and we've been doing ongoing testing in terms of rainwater runoff. However, we identified, frankly, our LEP saw the truck dump the material. We tested that material, and we're testing around that material, and that was dumped in a very specific location on the site. So currently, we're evaluating that. We'll come back, we'll look at developing a remedial action plan, and we intend to hold the contractor responsible under the agreement that we have, that they will pay for that cleanup.
So we're heading for some type of legal action with that contractor?
Potentially.
So let me ask a question.
Right now, we're still talking with them. They haven't said they won't do that, but obviously, that's one of the options.
Let me ask a question. So the agreement with them was, we have, and forgive me, guys, this is a free-flowing discussion, so I'm not trying to, but we have this yard, whereas we remove materials as DPW goes around and digs up ground and paves, and they throw all the materials in trucks, take it back to the yard, and they dump it.
On an annual basis, a fairly small amount, but over 30, 40, 50 years, it does build up.
That makes sense, right? So all that material sits there, and it was fill material, right? So the fill material is starting to get large. So 3 years ago, is that right?
Approximately, yes.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, I can get you the dates. I'm just...
Yeah, no, I understand. So a few years ago, there was an agreement reached with this third-party provider that came in and said, hey, we can take your material, mix it with more nutrient-rich material.
I wouldn't necessarily use your description of nutrient-rich, but other cleaner material? How about that?
And we can sell it off at a profit to somebody else who can use it for their purposes, right?
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Yeah, the town wasn't going to make any money on it, but we were going to get rid of the soil without having to pay any cost of removal. This is not the first contractor. We've had a number of contractors over time. Hadn't made any real progress on getting, so the DPW basically came up with a new program. It went out to bid. This was a contractor that won that bid and to operate the site.
Okay. Now, instead of taking our material off our property and mixing it at some location that they owned or whatever, and then turning around and getting rid of it, they actually came and brought their material onto our location and mixed it there?
Correct.
Okay. And they've been doing this for a period of years?
Correct.
Were they taking material out or just bringing their material in?
They were definitely taking it out, but there was a net increase in the material on there, a significant net increase.
So they did exactly the opposite of what they were supposed to do, which was
Correct.
take our stuff away. Okay. My question is, and how do we know it was their material that was contaminated and not our material? Like, it seems funky to me that we would allow them to bring our material on and mix it there.
In the simplest sense, there are two ways. One is that our LEP saw the truck dump the material.
Okay. So we have one, but they haven't completed the testing around the yard yet. They've got that one, right?
They've been doing some sample testing elsewhere, so at the moment, we have no reason to believe it's further than that.
Right.
And we've definitely identified what's there. It's also a function of both the contamination there, and it looks like there was some demolition material there. And when you look at the demolition material, it has stuff in there. It's not the kind of stuff that we do. It has like red bricks and stuff, and we don't have any of that.
Was that a one-time thing that they did that, or has this been going on for a period of years?
As best we can tell right now, it looks like a one-time thing.
They
But
just
again,
came
we're-
in at the end of the contract and dumped their stuff?
It looks like that may have been the case. And again, I'm going to caution that by saying we're evaluating where we are now, so I'm giving you the best available information.
Right.
That's what we have.
Right. But they also increased how much stuff we have in our pile.
They did.
And you said by a substantial amount?
Correct.
What's substantial?
It took it from about 30,000 cubic yards up to about 100,000 cubic yards over that 3-year period.
So they were supposed to take away 30,000, and they tripled.
Correct.
And we believe they brought good stuff in and just left it?
For the most part, because they were mixing it and taking it out also, but yes.
Why would they leave it? That doesn't sound like a profit generator to me.
They get paid for hauling it.
Huh?
They get paid for hauling it away from wherever they haul it down.
They charge clients to haul it away.
So they charge clients to haul it away and dump it at our
Give us
place.
thousands of dollars, we'll take it away.
And we think that's
We'll
good
dump it in-
stuff, though.
We'll dump it in Fairfield. It's a great idea.
Okay?
Under the contract, do we have contract rights for them to reduce that by a certain amount? So are they still responsible for taking that extra
Stuff away.
70,000?
According to the town attorney, we believe they're in breach of contract. I'd rather not get into all the legal basis for that, but you are, Mr. Walsh, you
Yeah.
are correct. We
Yeah.
do believe they're in breach of contract.
Okay.
And we also, we kind of went through this just last night, so my recall on that should be pretty good.
And do we have to go through all the 100,000 to figure out what's contaminated, or if anything else is like at the bottom of the pile that was brought in?
Right.
Again, at the moment, we think it's fairly limited, but to a certain degree, yeah, we'll be testing that as we go through, no question about it.
How did nobody notice that the pile was increasing to triple the size? I mean, this just seems,
Oh, it does, and that's a serious concern.
when did you find out about it?
It's something we've been monitoring for the past year. It reached my attention last spring. I've been getting weekly reports, I'm going to say for at least the last 6-9 months, that showed a net reduction in the pile every week.
That, were the reports coming from the
Yes.
contractor?
Through our, yes, to our DPW folks who were keeping me updated on that. And in looking at the summary numbers, it's, it can't be just a mistake that we got those numbers on a weekly basis that showed the kind of reduction that we were getting.
So this pile is in our yard, and our contractor's telling us, yeah, it's going down, but yet we could physically see it going up.
That would be a reasonable interpretation, correct?
Does anybody have any other questions before we?
Did the testing only start because the pile was getting so large?
No, the testing started because we're ending the agreement
Relationship.
and wanted to make sure that we started testing it to make sure we understood. So we have, as much as there's one specific area where we've been sampling the larger portion of the pile, we've been sampling the material coming in since September, so September, October, and November.
So we didn't, as part of this agreement, start going out there, just random testing to make sure that we have some outside contractor, that they're fulfilling their responsibility. We were just relying basically on a contract term that says, if it's contaminated, it's your responsibility.
It appears that way at the moment, yes.
When was that, when did your outside, I guess what you said, right? Or did I read it? Was it a surprise inspection, or somebody came and they just happened to be there the day that this thing dropped?
The term is random.
Yeah, okay.
But to be clear, it's a planned random inspection. It wasn't like just random, like, hey, let's go out there today because it's sunny, let's see what's going on.
Right.
It was, hey, we're going out there every week, we're going to go at a random time, we're going to test random areas. So the LEP had full access, had been testing it since September, taking random samples. This is the first test that came back with any items that raised issues.
Is that standard operating procedure that they were going to be testing like that, or did they decide it, or did the town say, let's go and start testing?
The town decided to let's start testing it as the project was winding down. We notified the contractor in September. The original agreement was up December 15th. We notified the contractor in September that we would not be renewing it because we kind of reevaluated what was going on because we weren't happy with the progress being made.
Clearly.
Clearly.
So what date did that test random?
11/29.
So the end of November.
We did not, it takes 2 weeks to get it back.
Sure.
We got it back around 12/14. we shut down the operation within 2 hours of getting the test back.
So was the stuff they're bringing in, there was like, for a period, of like all last summer, you kept seeing all these Julian trucks that were coming down Post Road, turning onto Reef Road, getting in the way of people trying to have lunch, trying to cross the road and at Firehouse Deli and whatever, and then going all the way down Reef Road. Is that the stuff that was being brought in by Julian?
Correct.
And they were paid to haul that from other areas and dump it in our yard. And what we thought was that was going to be better stuff, they were going to mix it with our stuff and take it all to a third party.
And to some degree that happened, obviously not to anywhere close to the degree we talked about. I mean, there were trucks leaving full of material, so, however, there's no question. I'm amazed at the difference on that, and our agreement with them clearly states they would make progress on removing the pile, and that's one of the key breaches in the agreement.
Have we hired an environmental attorney to work with our legal staff?
We're exploring that right now. We have LEPs come in, so in essence, those are the folks that work as an extension of DEEP. We actually notified DEEP right away, and we thought they would, they did come down. They've been down here for 2 visits. We've talked to a couple different, if you're familiar with DEEP, they kind of work in different departments. It's almost like different agencies to some degree. We thought they would be much more excited, if you will, or interested in what's taking place. Apparently, the contamination levels were not to the level that would generate their interest. So they are monitoring it. I don't mean to say they're not doing their job, but they're not as active as we had expected. They initially came in and said, nobody on site, don't move the equipment, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. Then they kind of said, okay, you guys can make sure the equipment's not contaminated, then you can release it, that type of thing.
And there's ongoing testing going on now?
Yes, right now we're waiting for some tests to come back that it looked at the area of contamination so we can come up with a remedial action plan.
Who pays for all that areas of testing and stuff? Is that us?
Right now, we're splitting the cost with Julian to get it off the dime. However, we will hold them fully responsible.
And they've agreed to pay for part
Half
of this
of it,
test?
the moment, their agreement says they'll pay for, their agreement says they're responsible for any contamination they brought on site.
Right. And their position is we haven't brought any on site? Is that what they're saying? Or they don't know?
I don't know if they have a full position yet, but they haven't stepped up to the plate and said, oh yeah, it's all our fault.
Right.
Have they provided us documents on where this fill came from?
They have not.
Have you asked for it?
Yes.
They've refused to give it to us?
Correct.
Wow.
So it sounds like we're going to have to bring a lawsuit to be able to subpoena it.
More than likely to get that.
Have they provided that information to DEEP?
DEEP hasn't aggressively followed up with it. I thought they would, and I fully anticipated that they would be more involved in this.
Do we, what do we know about this, Julian, as a corporation? Have they been around a long period of time? Are they big enough? Are they reputable enough?
With your permission at the moment, given where we are, I'll tell you, I'm not sure they have the best track record, and there's certainly a number of incidents that we're researching out there, but I would prefer not to characterize that in a public meeting, if you'll permit me
understand.
to avoid that.
Okay.
But there is history.
Things that we should have known about before signing an agreement with them several years ago?
Yeah, I'm sitting down with purchasing and talking about the process we use and how we vet folks and what we check, especially with all the internet tools capability and making sure that when we sign, especially a working relationship with, frankly, anybody, but certainly a working relationship, that we do a better job of researching the background and the history that goes along with that.
Did we specifically contract with them, or was this an RFP, or how was this?
It was a bid process, I think probably by RFP in that sense.
Normally, you have to, when those, I've seen some of those for our town, you have to fill out whether you've had any problems before, any lawsuits, any whatever. Was that in this RFP?
I'm going to say yes, Mr. Walsh, but I'm in the process of reviewing that now, and whatever it was, we did not do it tight enough. There's no
We
question.
found that
I'm
they've
not-
misrepresented anything to date, and that
they-
not
they-
told us about some problem they had in another community, or...
They very well might have. There certainly is more history there than we were aware of. The question is, did they not tell us, or did we not look hard enough?
Okay.
And whatever the reason was, we will fix that going forward.
Okay.
Mr. Becker?
I have to go back in the minutes and look, but I think that this first bubbled up around budget last year, and there were some questions at the time around this agreement and sort of, there's agreements that happen that don't necessarily exchange money, and so they don't go to, all the boards. I mean, there's sort of a different process there, and I guess, I don't need like a list of all of them or anything like that, but I would just say, hopefully the administration can sort of use this and sort of just go back through sort of all those types too, and just, just watch, just double check our exposure on any of those types of agreements, because this is a tough one in that it was, at one point, however, it was bidded or negotiated, it didn't go through sort of like, when it goes through the boards, I mean, it can sound like a tough process, but when there's a reason for it sometimes, and some things just simply they just don't because of the dynamic of the agreement. So I'm not trying to lay fault into it. I'm more trying to say, let's look through what we have out there. And
I would say two things. One, I'm not quite entirely clear what you're saying, but let's take it from the top. One, going through the boards, including this one, is not that difficult a process and shouldn't be a barrier to getting the appropriate approvals whenever we need those. Second, I believe we followed the appropriate process on this. Third, there is a lot of cycles of learning we can take from this. We're going to go back and do that, and we're going to improve our process. There's no way that I want to suggest that this is a model, and there's not a lot that we can improve on.
yeah, and not disputing item number 2 there on the process and how you did it. I guess what had come up last year was that this particular one either went only to Board of Selectmen or maybe even just administration at the time.
It didn't go to the Board of Selectmen. It was just an RFP and a
happened.
PO. It's part
Because
of
there's no money.
operating department. We do POs with outside contractors. Let me
Daily.
take a very basic example. We hire landscape contractors all over the place to do work, and that's what we do. And part of what the town has been doing is certainly going out and looking to use more outside contractors, as this board has both been part of, has seen the difference in the budget, and it has encouraged outside contracting. So that was this process. This did not go well, and that's one of the reasons there is so much to learn from what we can do better, including in some cases just not do this again.
Are we doing any other business with Julian?
They have a snowplow contract in effect at the moment.
For what?
For, I think, the school parking lots for the most part.
Have you notified the Board of Education of our issues with them?
No, I think that the snowplow contract is through the town.
So what are you guys doing on that contract right now?
We looked at it. It's my understanding we need to keep it in place at the moment, that it will go through this winter season.
Can't be breaching that.
And there's some practical, this came up
didn't mean to cut you
4
off.
days before a major snowstorm, so we weren't about to cut it off at that
understand
point. It's my understanding from DPW, there are some questions about whether mid-year you can pick up contractors, because they kind of all have agreements in place elsewhere. So it's,
Mr. Becker, I'm sorry, I was
Yeah.
jumping on what you were saying. so.
No, not a problem. I just want to add one point to that with the contractors. Totally agree, totally, support of the lawn maintenance contracts and the benefits that we have had. I think the difference is that this is a different beast, and I understand, yes, you're going to use it as a learning tool here, but I would think that the lawn contractor on a Parks and Rec field isn't setting up a league of their own while they're there cutting the lawns or something to that. This ended up creating a dynamic.
You would also hope that you would look and see that they were cutting the lawn. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the biggest issue I have, is we get a pile, it's on our property, we can go out and look at the pile and say, gee, it's going down. Or no, it's tripled in size.
They're just running a business on our land, I mean, it's just,
Yeah, there's a challenge when you ask your department heads to think outside the box, and this is certainly one of those options, that thinking outside the box. The goal is to save town money, and certainly some of that happened. It did not work. Right? Not every time you think outside the box, things are going to work, and certainly there are a host of things that could have been done better on the town side, and we will make sure that we improve those and that something like this does not happen again.
I think we got to probably really tighten it up, because I agree that going to privatizing some of these functions and saving money that's all a good thing. But we've also had problems with, like, I think the previous company was Green Cycle. I don't know if that's what they're called now. I don't know, but whoever runs the brush area, where that's piled up much higher than it should have and not been run properly, and then we have to get all over them, and people don't follow their contract, and there's been problems in the past.
Yeah, and actually,
And I'm not saying it's not running well now. I'm just saying that there's been problems.
I'll be happy to give you an update
Sure.
on that.
Yep.
Most recently, no, we just had a recent fire there.
Yep,
And,
I remember the fire, yep.
Sat down with the fire chief and said, okay, what do we have to do to make sure this never happens again?
Mhm.
Now, he won't let me use the word never.
Yeah.
All right? But we now have a protocol in place that's in effect right now, even though it's not part of the agreement. It will be in any future agreements, but Harvest New England, as Green Cycle is now called,
Okay.
has been very cooperative because they want to do a good job there. But we basically have identified what issues are with the operation and the fires there. We found out that it's the height of the pile. It is the type of material in terms of whether it's been filled or not, and then how long the pile sits there, the age of the pile, for lack of a better term. We are now, so we have working protocols in place to determine those three parameters. We also, twice a week, are testing the temperature inside the pile. And based on the temperature, there are certain actions that take place based on if it gets up that high. So there are things we've learned better. So naively, I can't tell you never, I guess, but we certainly have enough parameters in place that it is highly unlikely that we'll have another fire incident, because it's basically combustion that takes place well inside the pile, which is the problem. You can't put water on it because that actually increases the fire. There are a number of challenges in that environment. But the goal is to make sure that that doesn't happen again.
Yeah, it just seems as though when we start allowing people to use our property, there's got to be extra supervision. It seems like it's like the opposite. It seems like, okay, I got rid of this function. I don't have to handle the brush, or I don't have to handle that pile anymore. But the problem is when you start letting them come into your property, like this situation with Julian, depending on how it works out, is like the nightmare situation. It's like, it seems like a great idea, and all of a sudden you end up with a hazmat site, okay, and all of a sudden now it becomes a problem. And that's the biggest, and that's why there's got to be all sorts of
Yeah.
supervision,
Right.
like built in, extra insurances, I mean, lots of stuff. And maybe this was an experiment, and maybe we learn from this and whatever, but it's just, it's always troublesome. And I have my own clients who I have to deal with this on, and they want to be laissez-faire, and, oh, I just want to lease them this spot on my property, and you know, they want, and I'm like, and they can't understand why I'm building a 30-page agreement for what they thought was a one-page agreement. But it's all this stuff that you have to stay on top of because of the environmental issues.
Your points are well taken. We'll take it there. I think that Harvest New England actually has been a reverse side. I think it has been well monitored. We read in as we addressed this last incident, both to get it to stop, that we also looked at the history and realized that this was happening a little bit too often, even if they weren't full-blown incidents. And the issue is I asked the chief to put in protocols to make sure this doesn't happen. And we've got those in place. So that provides a valuable service to our town, both to our residents, but also provides a place for contractors to bring things so that we can keep them out of other classic dumping areas in the town.
I think the scariest thing I've heard on this, and I do want to be cognizant that it's almost 11 o'clock, is the fact, Mr. Tetro, that they were providing reports saying that the pile was going down. And
we could have had somebody, I guess, just by physical inspection, realize that that wasn't true. And that, to me, is where we fell down on our aspect of oversight of the project, because we could see it with our own eyes. And I agree with other members of this board. I think the outsourcing programs that have been done by DPW and other areas, in large measure, have gone quite well.
This is certainly the exception that proves the rule.
Right. And it was the, I don't know what else to say about it, other than
You know, if I were to put this in football terms, I think we've got a good team at DPW. This was not a good game. And this was not their best effort.
Were you going to make a report to us at some point in time? I was kind of a little taken back that the way, we learn this is by the neighbors down at the beach all have a meeting with you, but we're not ever updated on this. Like, I would have expected you would have come to us and say, hey, we got a problem that potentially could involve some liability. I can't talk to you about the specifics of a case or a claim or whatever. However,
What's tonight?
What's
This is the update.
no, we asked for it. Tom asked for it. There was nothing that was.
So the first selectman has to run to this board whenever there's a potential problem? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I was surprised to see this.
I'd-
I don't know if anybody else on this board was surprised to hear about this. I know I was.
Yeah, we've been having
I mean,
public.
I don't know another body that's gotten a presentation on this.
We've been having,
Well, because we asked for it. If we didn't ask for it, it wasn't going to come up.
Go ahead,
You know
Mr.
that as well as
Titchell.
I do.
No, it's not true. You would have gotten one. You're
What,
getting a
tonight?
presentation tonight.
Well, because we asked for
I mean-
one, John. Mr. Flynn asked for it.
Go ahead, Mr. First Selectman.
we've been having public hearings on this with the neighborhood since last summer as part of the operational issues with the pile and part of better communication with the neighborhood. And for the record, we will be having public hearings with the neighborhood every 2 months from this point on, as well as kind of emails getting out on our progress in terms of how we're doing this every couple weeks. The meeting last night was filmed on Fair TV, so the whole community has a chance to see that. In terms of coming back to this board, when we're sure what the financial impact is, we certainly would come back if it was going to have an At this point, we don't know what that impact is. So I think it's just a question of timing, Mr. Walsh. Certainly would come back to this board as soon as we're clear that there'd be a financial impact and what that would be and when that would hit.
Do we believe there's going to be a financial impact?
I am not sure at this point, Mr. Flynn. It's certainly possible. But if you said how much, I wouldn't have any way of telling you how much that is.
Can I make a point of order, too? I mean, I appreciate the conversation tonight, but this matter wasn't on the agenda.
No.
I would have liked to have known that we were going to have a 45-minute conversation
Me too.
about this. So why are we talking about it tonight? Why wasn't this matter put on the agenda as a specific matter?
You know why?
Yeah.
Because
Why?
I found out about it at 5 o'clock this afternoon.
Well, then the protocol is to put it on the next agenda. I knew nothing about this. It would have been nice to read something about it, maybe formulate some questions. I just think it's an inappropriate process, with all due respect.
I get it.
Or we could have made a motion to add it to our agenda with a 2/3 majority, right? Under Robert's rules. We could have taken something not.
Well,
on
then
our
do it
agenda.
the right way.
Okay.
We could have
Mr.
debated adding it to the agenda, and then maybe had a real good discussion about it at our next meeting, not at 10:30 at night.
Well,
Right,
I'll
but
tell you.
that's the purpose of a quarterly review, is that's the exact topic of what we're supposed to be talking about, is what issues, what possibilities are out there that could be costing the town more money.
I disagree with that 100%. That's not the purpose of the quarterly review.
No, it actually is. It's, the purpose of the quarterly review is to understand the financial standing of the town at a given point in time. When a local news outlet reports an article that says that there's environmental liability, there's PCBs, there's a potential legal ramifications with one of our contractors, the quarterly review is exactly the right forum to have that conversation. Now, to your point, Mr. Mottola, the fact that that news broke at 4:45 this afternoon, right, or was reported by the press at 4:45, is unfortunate. Now,
And did you all know you were going to talk about this tonight? The Republican members here?
No.
No. Okay. I take your word for that.
If
You should,
Yeah, if I
because we
might-
didn't know.
yeah. If I might add, I think that in terms of properly reporting to this board, it would be helpful if I had noticed, because I was about to leave when I heard the chairman say that we're going to cover these last two topics.
Yep.
And so I stayed just for that, because I figured one of them had to include me.
Right.
But certainly, if there is more detail and more, because we just did the presentation last night, I would suggest that my update to you is pretty current and pretty accurate. But in another instance, it might have been better if I had noticed, to make sure that I'm updating this board with accurate and current information. So it's helpful to know ahead of time.
I wish I knew ahead of time.
And I respect the conversation tonight. I think it's an important topic to talk about. I don't mean it that way. It's just, I honestly thought we were going to talk about something for about 5 minutes at the end of our meeting, and this has been going on for 45 minutes. And to me, it just seems it would have been more appropriate to maybe have it at the next meeting as an agenda item. That's all.
We don't have a next meeting until April.
Well, then,
We have all these budget
we have a
meetings.
special meeting then. That's still, the fact that we don't have a next meeting until April doesn't allow this board, in my opinion, to go around the process of having a matter of this specific on the agenda and list it as an agenda item. That's why we have agendas. If this was on the agenda, you may have had people from the public here who wanted to hear this conversation.
Absolutely.
That's all I'm saying, and I don't mean any disrespect to you, Chairman Flynn. I certainly don't. I have a lot of respect for you, but that's the concern that I have.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Maybe we should put it on. It'd be great to have a public here in person sometime.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Or watch the Fair TV meeting last night where we had the public there,
I
Mr.
was
Becker.
going to say they're at that. Yeah, we're so empty here.
All right. So, do we have any other items? Mrs. Leclerc?
Sorry. It's just a question for Mr. Mayor, and that is on the process for hiring a new auditor. Because I'm on the audit committee, and I believe that that's the one by charter, that's the responsibility of this board. And I just want to know if you've done anything and what the process is.
Haven't done anything. We'll put together an RFP, and we'll have your committee obviously review and sign off, and then hold interviews.
And do you have a planned time frame for that?
No.
Anybody else? Mr. Becker?
Really quick. But just when this does come, when DPW does come to us in a couple weeks, I assume this will probably in some way come up. I know I'll have some questions for them in regards to, sort of their cost into the next year and how they're managing, what they were dumping, things like that. So you could just pass that along to sort of at least have some, if there's anything you need to be prepared for, trying to give them a little bit of a heads up at least.
Thank you. I think it's a pretty current topic, something we've been engaged with the neighborhood on for the past year, and I think that they should be very well prepared, and I think they'll have their budget to present to you, so that any questions on costs for next year certainly should be, they should be able to answer those.
Thank you. With that, I have no other communications or anything. Anybody else? Seeing none, can I have a motion to adjourn? We'll go with Mr. Walsh, and we'll go with Mrs. Leclerc. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? We're done. Good night, everybody.